4 years old. I started playing video games when I was only 4 years old, thanks to Grandpa ignoring the rules of my parents. 4 was also the age that I began playing Zelda because the first ever video game I played was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. My exposure to gaming as a hobby came when my grandfather decided to satisfy my curiosity and play through the opening adult section, filled with what I could only deduce at the time as screeching zombies. I had nightmares for weeks filled with the echoing screams of the Redeads as I would try and fail to escape. In spite of the fear, or maybe because of it, I would keep returning to this one game ad nauseum until I couldn't anymore. As I grew older and my parents had to work less and less, my grandparents didn't get to babysit me as much, meaning that my Nintendo 64 access dwindled. This didn't stop my Zelda obsession, however. I craved everything. A Link to the Past on my Game Boy. I was obsessed. Four Swords Adventures at a friend's house. I wouldn't shut up about it. Phantom Hourglass for the DS after I lost my Game Boy. I was even more obsessed. I played Twilight Princess on the Wii, friends and family gave me Spirit Tracks and Skyward Sword for the holidays. During this time, I would also get to return to Ocarina of Time, and finally finish it on my Nintendo 3DS. A Link Between Worlds was another gift to me a few years later, and I never stopped playing that game, pouring dozens of hours into it, finishing several playthroughs on several difficulties, including what was my first ever experience of intrinsically motivated play, a 3 hearts only playthrough. Now, everything clicked. I played the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, Link's Awakening, Four Swords, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, Majora's Mask 3D, and even Triforce Heroes. It didn't end there. The Wii U was my next pit stop on this Zelda journey. Wind Waker HD, A Link to the Past, Minish Cap, and Twilight Princess HD. After my experience with the entire franchise, I played, finished, and obsessed over Breath of the Wild for more than 800 hours. My raging passion for The Legend of Zelda has burned just as brightly ever since. I've grown up alongside this series, but over those decades, I've experienced a plethora of other video games. I've experienced heartwarming stories about friendship and family in a story with fart boxes. I've experienced in-depth action combat, swinging my keyblade to slay legions of heartless and nobodies. I've experienced the profound, poignant discoveries of Outer Wilds. I've experienced the thrill of taking down the Covenant with my friend beside me in Halo. I've experienced the haunting songs of Emi Evans and Keiichi Okabe in Nier. I've experienced the refined creative puzzles of Portal 2. Each of the aforementioned games encapsulates the reasons I play video games to this day. Heartbreak, action, discovery, cooperation, awe, and satisfaction. Tears of the Kingdom is a confusing game because it tries to capture every one of these motivators. Most video games refine a single motivator or reason to play. Portal 2's central motivator of play is satisfaction, the jubilation that arises from solving a complex, multi-layered puzzle. Tears of the Kingdom does not have a single central motivator. In actuality, none of its motivators are particularly noteworthy. I've seen other games with more developed stories, combat, exploration, vehicle building, and stealth. Then, what makes this experience unique and special? Well, there's no other game that attempts to create an epic story, and one-on-one melee duels, and potent memorable discoveries, and customizable building mechanics, and a thorough physics system, and radial-based stealth, all at once. This is where I believe that the dividing consensus on Tears of the Kingdom stems from. While it attempts to accomplish a lot of miniature, varied experiences, not each experience is adventurous and exciting enough. That's the name of the game, though. It has to be a legendary adventure, or it ain't no Zelda. What this game attempts is grandiose. Tears of the Kingdom wants to be the most expansive, intense, layered, interconnected adventure in the entire series. Despite that, the game feels familiar and underwhelming. There are a few reasons for this, but the main one is that Tears of the Kingdom isn't actually a sequel to Breath of the Wild. Its combat is too similar, the puzzles are more hollow than what came before, the story gives me more deja vu than my dreams, and the adventure is more restrictive. Breath of the Wild's identity centered around freedom. It is, to this day, the most freedom I've been given in a video game. A sequel would expand on that freedom, providing more opportunities for player choice and expression. A sequel would tell a story that continues the journeys of the old characters, expanding on their dynamic development and/or introducing new ones. A sequel would create deeper, more complex puzzles based on Nintendo's learning experience from creating their first ever open-world video game in 2017. By these three definitions of a sequel, definitions that apply to sequels for a plethora of other video games, Nintendo, by all means, didn't make a sequel to Breath of the Wild. For anyone familiar with the Dark Souls series of games, there are two camps of players, those who use shields and those who don't. Shields are tools they can acquire quickly near the beginning of each game, and they function similarly to how they do in Breath of the Wild. They block and require precise timing to parry an enemy's attack. The main difference is that not every humanoid enemy attack can be parried in Dark Souls. The reward for parrying is a greater output of damage than what happens in Zelda, however, since there's a special counterattack called a riposte. Think of this extra attack like a sneak strike, except it occurs for sneaking behind an enemy as well as parrying their attack. The sneak strike boosts your weapon's damage by 8 times its original value, meaning a 4 damage Boko Club will deal 32 hit points worth of damage during a successful sneak strike. The riposte from Dark Souls, though I haven't been able to find a concrete damage calculation, reliably kills most elite enemies in a given area if you are at an appropriate level. Imagine killing a silver moblin with a single sneak strike, and that's the equivalent damage output of a riposte in Dark Souls. Hence, the argument around the use of shields arises. People who decide not to use shields argue that shields, quote-unquote, break the game too much, meaning that shields reduce the difficulty of the game too much for it to be enjoyable to this specific subset of players. Shieldless Dark Souls players are intrinsically motivated. They actively choose not to use shields because of an internal motivation to be challenged, and conquer said personalized challenge. There's no material reward for ignoring shields. The material in-game rewards are identical to the players who embrace shield. People who still use shields and whatever other tools they can find are extrinsically motivated players. The goal of this subset of players is to complete the game, and whatever the game provides is fair to use. For these players, there isn't an internal desire to set a personally tailored challenge. The motivation to play stems from the in-game concrete rewards that come from defeating a boss. Item drops, new weapons, new armor, experience points, and currency to buy new items or upgrades. Understanding the two types of motivation, extrinsic and intrinsic, is essential to understanding the conversation around Zelda with its rebirth in Breath of the Wild, because the series now caters more to one crowd over the other. You may be considering what kind of player you are now, thinking, what motivates me to play? It's a difficult question to answer, so let's take a look at my own self as an example. I would say that I am ambitrinsically motivated. Much like how the middle ground of being extroverted or introverted is being ambiverted, the middle ground of being extrinsically or intrinsically motivated is being ambitrinsically motivated. It's near impossible to categorize yourself into a single camp of motivation, extrinsic or intrinsic, because your type of motivation fluctuates, changing based on each game or experience. Returning to From Software's library, when I played Elden Ring in 2022, I was extrinsically motivated. I used every tool at my disposal because I personally found the game too challenging otherwise. What I wanted to experience from Elden Ring was the in-game material rewards from defeating bosses, discovering hidden gameplay mechanics, and exploring the beautiful world. How I play the Zelda series could not be more different. When I play Breath of the Wild, I am, without a doubt, an intrinsically motivated player. I have created personalized rule sets I use for every playthrough to customize the challenge for myself and what I believe would be generally fair for most players. Aside from completing specific challenges like a 3 hearts only playthrough, I always follow the same personal rules. As a caveat, I would like to mention that all adjustments I made with the difficulty are tailored toward my own experience as an able-bodied, avid video game player. I would love to see further in-depth difficulty customization in the Zelda series. But asking Nintendo for actual accessibility options is like asking Elon Musk to stop burning Twitter to the ground. When upgrading armor, I never pass the second tier because I believe that the armor stat blocks too much damage for opponents to be threatening at the third or fourth tiers. During my first 3 hearts only run, my fully upgraded soldier's armor trivialized nearly every enemy. They would all deal chip damage, the lowest amount of damage possible, that being a quarter of a heart. Taking damage from bokoblins, moblins, and Lizalfos was negligible, and after a hit, I could continue on swinging my weapon carelessly as if nothing ever happened. The only real threat were the Guardians, who had a different chip damage value compared to all other enemies in Breath of the Wild. The minimum amount of damage a Guardian or Guardian-type enemy could deal is 3 hearts. In a 3 hearts only run, the best option against Guardians is to run. My second rule I institute is a maximum health value of 240 HP, or 20 heart containers. Combined with my armor restrictions, silver bokoblins generally deal a single heart of damage, and considering that they have the lowest damage output of all silver tier enemies, the damage only climbs from there. The loss of hearts is always minimal, and the only exceptions are Guardians and now Lynels. Elite enemies who, in my opinion, should always have more punishing attacks than one meager tantrum-prone bokoblin. The third rule I have, and the one which I believe is the most punishing, involves a restriction on how many meals I can prepare. The maximum amount of meals I can make is 10, taking up 2 rows in the food tab. Why am I so strict on food compared to the other methods of damage reduction? Well, to put it bluntly, cooking is unbalanced. In Breath of the Wild, you can open the menu at any time to eat as many of your meals as you want, not including the treasure trove of materials which can heal you too. Storing thousands of materials in Link's backpack is commonplace on any playthrough. Even though some materials can only heal half a heart or 1 single heart, your total healing output from your bottomless backpack quickly adds up. One comedic, yet practical method people found to avoid the burning heat of Death Mountain was to sprint toward Goron City, chugging Link's abundant supply of apples whenever health is dangerously low, praying you can buy the heat-resistant armor in time before you deplete all of your health-restoring materials. My final rule involves Korok seeds, and it's a newer rule I added for myself in 2021. No upgrading weapons or bow slots. At first, this rule came out of my own curiosity to see if, when at the lowest amount of equipment slots, was durability too punishing. The conclusion I came to was a resounding no. I always had enough weapons for every challenge I discovered, and in my most recent playthrough, I even killed the Lynel in the Colosseum ruins almost immediately after leaving the Great Plateau. If you think that's impressive, it's really not, and there's one particular reason why. You can never go back to how you used to play Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild leverages the most common feature of play to create its difficulty curve, the unknown. The fastest way to become stronger is to fight more and discover hidden combat tricks for yourself. When I first played Breath of the Wild, I would freakishly spam the attack button and hope the enemy wouldn't kill me before I killed them. Fast forward to how I fought the Lynel in the Colosseum ruins. I had to know about mounting Lynels, weapon jump cancels, headshot damage multipliers, and durability conservation, techniques which no first-time player will or should know about. The contrast is stark. How I fight enemies now is far more efficient than what I used to do. That said, no matter how long I avoid playing Breath of the Wild, I can never forget crucial combat skills that decimate any sense of difficulty. No matter when I go back, I will never forget about Flurry Rush, the powerful mechanic which lets you punish enemies for a majority of their attacks. I will never forget about parrying, the other counterattack option when Flurry Rush would fail. I will never forget enemy attack patterns and the different timings of each enemy type. I will never forget where to find the highest damage dealing equipment, or where to gather resources that replenish the most hearts. Since I can never forget, I can't truly experience Breath of the Wild again. You can think of progression in Zelda like a traditional linear level scaling system. When I started my first playthrough back in 2017, I was at level 1. No experience points to my name or character skills unlocked. How I gained experience points was by actually experiencing the world, which meant dying a lot. Death was the greatest teacher, and after every death I was always gaining experience. I also remember on the Great Plateau when I dodged an enemy attack that was a little too close for comfort, I unlocked a new skill, Flurry Rush. I had dodge at the precise time to trigger a perfect dodge and counterattack, defeating the bokoblin in the process. After I defeated that bokoblin, I gained a significant amount of experience points. Unlike other character leveling games, starting a new game or a new profile doesn't reset your stats back to their starting values, because instead of Link being the character that levels up, you, the player, are the person that levels up. You can't reset your own knowledge, so your stats are forever the same no matter when you play again. This progression of the player becoming the character that gains experience, instead of the virtual character on screen, is what made me fall in love with Breath of the Wild over 6 years ago. It's what kept me playing and ruminating for 6 years too, when creating a sequel to this game's foundation, one which relies on a player's lack of knowledge and experience about the geography of Hyrule, the combat strategies of enemies, and the optimal ways of play. How do you even begin? How do you create mystery in a world that someone is familiar with? How do you create new combat encounters that alter enemy strategies? How do you subvert the older, optimized strategies? How do you make a sequel to Breath of the Wild? Gaming is another language that most of you watching are probably fluent in, whereas a newer player will not obey unspoken game rules as much as I would. For instance, if there's a locked door in front of you, a fluent gamer would respond by saying, "Where's the key?" An emerging player would say, "Why can't I break down this door?" Video game worlds create the illusion of consistency and believability. But to reach that ideal place of believability, the player must relinquish some agency, understanding that the rules which govern the real world cannot exist identically in the game. Video game logic, as it's often called, is a set of implicit rules which players fluent in video games know and follow. Someone may obey the rules to avoid frustration and attempting to accomplish something that the game world is incapable of allowing. Other players obey the rules out of habit, knowing that a game over or you died screen are signs that you're playing the game wrong. Rasputin, a video essayist on YouTube, has a series of videos about forcing his wife, otherwise known as the lady he lives with, to try playing popular video games despite her never having played video games before. When she played the introduction to The Last of Us, she steered the main character, Joel, into a small alleyway in the distance. One problem: a fire was in between Joel and the alley's entrance. Before making contact with the flames, the result would always be the same. A zombie materialized to attack Joel, resulting in a game over screen. Rasputin's wife thought, since a zombie was the cause of her death, she needed to avoid the zombie to enter the alley she saw. Attempt after attempt, the same result happened. Why? What she experienced was a contextualized fail state. Fail states are the conditions that result in a player receiving punishment during their play. The most common fail state is a game over screen, sending the player back to their most recent save. The punishment for receiving a game over screen is a loss of progress, forcing the player to redo the current section. Naughty Dog, the developers of The Last of Us, decided to provide an in-game reasoning for failure. For this introduction, failing to proceed to the correct area will always result in the zombie attacking Joel. Whether Joel touches the fire, runs down the wrong direction, or actually comes into contact with the zombie, the context of the fail state will be the same: death by zombie bite. Fluent players who are familiar with how games directly and indirectly guide players would probably respond differently in the same situation as Rasputin's wife. When I played The Last of Us, I received the same zombie bite fail state. My immediate thought following the game over screen was, "Oh, I went the wrong way." I knew I went the wrong way because I didn't expect The Last of Us to account for my lacking coordination to find the appropriate path forward. Moreover, my previous experience with other narrative-driven games created expectations of play. I expected there would be lengthy cutscenes where no player input would be required. I expected developed dynamic main characters. Principally, I expected that there would be a single path to victory with little to no deviation from the one planned solution. Not all expectations came true, but the initial assumption that they would be informed how I played and responded to failure. Imagine a hypothetical task where you needed to get inside a spooky house to grab a key item, but the door was locked. The place was decrepit, filled with shattered windows. The home was on its last legs, built with old wood. The item you needed was in the basement of the complex. So how do you break in? If this were real life, you could break through the frail windows and climb inside. If you wanted to channel your inner pyromaniac, you could burn the house down, retrieving the item in the house's remains. You could even break down the door with enough force. If this were a video game, you couldn't break through the frail windows because those are simply for decoration. You couldn't break down the door because physical force is only viable for defeating enemies, not damaging your environment. You couldn't burn the house down and grab your desired item in the wreckage either because the designers didn't program the ability for wood to burn. The dilapidated wooden exterior of the house is invincible. The only path forward is to play along with the scenario and find the correct key. What if, however, video games tried to mimic the first example? What would that look like? What would developers need to implement to create a successful mimicry of real life? What would happen if video games tried to become real? Deus Ex released in 2000 for PC, and at first glance, it's pretty underwhelming. Your path of progression follows a self-insert character named J.C. Denton as he completes missions in a linear order through open but empty levels. Most objectives involve finding someone or something, or destroying someone or something.
I don't believe what I just saw.
Pretty simplistic. You generally have 4 styles of gameplay to solve any problem, but each one is bare bones. Melee combat involves spamming the same attack button without dying. Stealth involves basic crouching and slow movement to avoid enemy sightlines. Conversation involves deception and persuasion checks, determined by Denton's stat points from the relatively simple RPG skill system. Range combat is the most complex, with it being a standard first-person shooter, but there was far more enemy complexity and weapon variety in other similar shooters at the time. With shallow solutions to simplistic objectives, what makes Deus Ex special, or even relevant to this conversation? Well, although individual playstyles are simplistic, there are a plethora of other mechanics which I omitted. A few of these include different barrel types, some of which are explosive and others that drop items, hacking which can improve based on the aforementioned RPG skill system, item manipulation where most any item in the environment, like a box, crate, chair, or otherwise, can be picked up and placed somewhere else, grenades that can be placed or thrown, stealth mechanics that mitigate the amount of noise JC produces, guards who patrol their stationed area, leaving it to inspect noises as well as suspicious sightings, a skill tree where the player can spend skill points earned through missions to improve the efficacy of other mechanics, character equipment which allows the player to gain new types of interactions like moving a previously immovable object, an individualized looting system where every item takes up real-world space, a unique health system where individual body parts have their own health pools that, when depleted, disable your ability to use said limb, and lockpicking that becomes easier as Denton levels up. No particular mechanic is deep, but the combination of them creates, in the words of the Zelda team, multiplicative gameplay. Multiplicative gameplay is the idea that several different systems, even simpler ones, combine to create unique solutions to every problem. Multiplicative play occurs when a multitude of options for problem solving, exploration, and fighting multiply to create an individualized experience for every player. Remembering my own experience playing Deus Ex for the first time, my actions during the first mission were different from any other player. My goal was to reach the top of the complex, secure the area, and capture the hostage. Guards patrolled the outer areas in an erratic formation, so I stacked 2 metal boxes on top of each other, hid behind them, and slowly inched closer to the building entrance. Inevitably, the guards took notice and came to inspect the suspiciously humanoid figure hiding behind the box tower. They didn't live to figure out what was behind those boxes. After Operation Box Tower was successful, I pulled out some grenades and threw them a little too close for comfort, damaging myself in the process. I didn't die, but my legs were severely injured. Any further damage would mean I'd be legless for the rest of the mission. Regretting some of the violent rampages I had with prior guards, I wanted to try something more peaceful, something easier on my virtual conscience. I crouched, slowly inching myself closer toward 2 guards at the top of a set of stairs. I pulled out my crossbow, loaded with tranquilizer darts, and fired. Being presumptuous, I assumed, like other video games, the sleeping effect would be instantaneous. I was instead greeted with 2 bullets to the legs and 2 lost limbs to boot. Crawling toward cover, 2 loud thuds echoed throughout the hallway. I crawled back to see the guards, sleeping peacefully. They may have hurt their heads, but they were alive. Losing my legs meant I could no longer run, my default speed decreased, and my camera was glued to the floor. Despite the heavy loss, the mission was a success. I crawled to greet and threaten, if you can call it that, the hostage before crawling back to base. Did I have fun slowly crawling through the vast level I previously traversed? Absolutely not, it was miserable. I think most of my footage consists of me crawling while deciphering where to go. But could I have had the same experience if Deus Ex didn't establish a variety of gameplay systems that work together harmoniously? Absolutely not. For a game to create a similar experience to Deus Ex's first mission, the developers would need to add and refine stealth mechanics, item manipulation, patrolling enemy AI, individualized health pools for every body part, status conditions based on lost limbs, grenade physics, first-person shooting, and pacifist takedowns, among everything else required to create even a functioning video game. Tears of the Kingdom, while utilizing different types of mechanics like vehicle and weapon crafting instead of skill trees and hacking, has the same kind of multiplicative design as Deus Ex. Here's something that took me a while to realize. Tears of the Kingdom isn't particularly good at anything it does. There are a plethora of different gameplay styles that blend sometimes disparate genres such as shooting and vehicle building, yet, just as it was in 2000 for Deus Ex, no individual system is that deep, and many other contemporary video games are more complex than anything in Zelda. If I want deep melee combat, I can play Sekiro for its rhythmic duels and varied enemies and bosses. If I want a thorough, complex crafting system to express myself, I'll just play Minecraft, which still receives content updates with new craftable items as of this video's release. If I have a hunger for role-playing as a noble knight trying to save the land, Baldur's Gate 3 exists, or even actual Dungeons and Dragons for that matter. However, there is no other video game where I can sneak into an enemy camp, disguised as one of them, corral them all together, craft a makeshift bomb, throw a fuse to detonate it, and finish off the remaining monsters with some swordplay. There is no other game where I can spend 20 minutes crafting autonomous machines to fight with me by firing lasers at a boss, while I take a much-needed break. There is no other game where I can fulfill a character's request to rebuild dilapidated houses by chopping down trees, attaching them to my horse wagon, failing to make any significant distance, deciding to build an ATV with Zonai springs as suspension, dumping the logs into the cargo section, slowly driving my way from the center of the map to the southeastern corner, getting stuck next to a hill, propelling my makeshift four-wheeler over the hill by launching it with rockets, and carrying my vehicle through the forest and over bridges. There is no other player out there who had the same experience as I did while playing The Legend of Zelda. Therein lies the beauty of multiplicative gameplay: individuality. Individualized, customizable experiences like what I've described celebrate every player's own autonomy and choice by expressly allowing you to play in a way that is uniquely yours, in a way that facilitates the creation of stories. What kinds of stories? Well, here's one from 2017 I remember fondly. I was in school with a few of my friends, some of whom did not avidly play video games like myself. Sure, they dabbled in some popular multiplayer games like League of Legends, Minecraft, or Super Smash Bros., but single-player experiences were entirely out of the question. I still talked and hung out with them though, because that's what you do in school. You find people, you talk, and you're friends. Not really by choice, but by chance. On the other end of the spectrum was myself, an avid enjoyer of single-player experiences who became a hermit after Breath of the Wild came out to play as much as I possibly could. I went to school the Monday afterward, found my friends, and reluctantly went to a class we all hated. Class ends, lunch begins, we start talking, my friend mentions they've been playing Breath of the Wild. Hold on. The same friend who did not have a Nintendo console since the GameCube, who almost exclusively played multiplayer video games, got a Switch to play Zelda, a series whose past few games did not leave a pleasant impression in my friend's mind. I was flabbergasted, too shocked to ask any questions, even when another friend chimes in, "Oh yeah, me too." Already spooked, the two friends walking with me continue their conversation, sharing their own unique experiences. They all sounded familiar, but none were quite like my own. Before I could even finish processing this new knowledge about my friends, the first friend from before plainly says, "Yo, did you find the dragon yet?" I calmly replied, "There's a f***ing dragon?" I had not seen a dragon in my entire playthrough up to that point, and I was certain that I had the longest playtime of all my friends. They regale me with their story of climbing a frigid mountain, reaching the peak, and discovering a dragon. It wasn't just a dragon, though. There was a dragon boss fight. My friend wandered there of their own volition. No map marker or character instructed them on where to go, and that lack of direction made the experience all the more unique. Later that night, I remembered my friend's story. Curious, I dug through my memories to find hints of where to travel based on their story. After a long, cold climb, I reached the peak of a towering mountain in the east, but no dragon. For a moment, I was worried that my friend lied to me. I was quite gullible after all. I would soon discover, looking up above at the divine spring, there was no deceit in my friend's words. There was a dragon atop the mountain. I did fight it, and it was awesome. For games, digital or physical, what I described was a ludic story. A story of my own creation that derives from gameplay experiences. Ludic stories are unique to the medium. Whereas films, novels, and more have a single planned story, gameplay has the ability to create an infinite amount of possible stories. If you ever tell a story about an intense sports game, or a tale about a crazy card game you had with your family, or an epic about that time you slew a dragon in Skyrim, you've experienced and told a ludic story. I mentioned Dungeons & Dragons earlier as an example of a game with more in-depth role-playing, but something it and Tears of the Kingdom have in common is the ability to create memorable, unique stories that happen ludically, through gameplay alone. D&D, as it's colloquially known, was not introduced to me in the most appealing fashion. I have met dozens of people who used to be like me, who are hesitant to play the famous tabletop role-playing game out of a fear for the rules. The restrictions on the correct way to play. If you haven't heard it from someone else, listen to me when I say this. Dungeons & Dragons doesn't really have rules. The only structure there is are the rules that govern combat and how to use different types of dice at your disposal. D&D is like improv. You can mold it into whatever you want. Serious improv? That's doable. Comedic improv? Always welcome. Long-form serious Western-themed improv with audience input? Sure can do. Improvised musicals? There are plenty of those. Comedic improv structured through a series of games with some audience involvement and suggestions? Yeah, why not? Improv can be anything you want, and the same is true for Dungeons & Dragons. The players are the improv troupe members, and the Dungeon Master, also known as the DM, is the troupe master, the person who guides the troupe and redirects to preserve the show's momentum. Like improv, there are general suggestions which prevent the show's conflict from halting any progression whatsoever. Without having performed in improv, you probably know about yes and, the central rule of improv and, in my opinion, D&D. Lots of emerging players of D&D will ask what they can do when they should say that they will do something. When playing, you shouldn't say, "Can I be extremely xenophobic?" You should say, "I am extremely xenophobic." That's an actual line I heard from someone when I was a DM. I was as shocked as you are. Silly as it is, I can ask, or rather say, the same thing in Zelda. Challenge run videos will often posit, "Can I beat insert game without weapons?" In Tears of the Kingdom, that's no longer a question, because you can. Easily. The real question becomes, how do I beat Zelda without weapons? It's not, can you beat the final boss without doing anything? The question you should ask is, how do I beat the final boss without doing anything? Can you complete Zelda with only cars? Isn't an interesting question anymore. The interesting one is, how do you complete Zelda with only cars? How is it possible for a single game to allow for such variety in how an individual plays? Well, there are two parts to that answer. The first reason is because of the variety of game mechanics on offer. Building vehicles is restrictive compared to what other creatively inclined games like Minecraft can offer, but it's flexible enough to allow for probably more than the developers imagined. You can create cars, bikes, tanks, photo booths, cannons, ships, flying ships, hovercrafts, the Green Goblin's glider from Spider-Man, the Passion of the Korok's friends, and even songs. Not everyone will craft devices with the same complexity. I, for one, started out by building bridges longer than the runtime for a Peter Jackson film's extended cut. but there's enough variety and complexity for every player to express themselves. The simplest but funniest approach I've seen involves rotating a log in the air before using Link's ability to rewind an object's movement to perpetually smack a boss to death. Freedom is really the first part to answer that question. How does someone make a game with individualized experiences? The second part is the remainder of the video. In spite of Nintendo's acceptance of player freedom, the developers don't account for every playstyle fairly. They certainly shouldn't be expected to, but in a game about playing how you want to play, some of the reasons why I and many others play video games have not been treated kindly, especially with regards to playing Zelda games. I, for example, also play Zelda for tense combat, complex puzzles, and epic stories, all of which are elements which Tears of the Kingdom wants to have. Otherwise, they wouldn't be as much of a focus as they are. It's unfortunate, then, how underwhelming each one is. The Zelda formula was a term used in community discourse to describe how and why Zelda games felt so familiar from title to title. The supposed formula provided the basic outline of the game's structure, combat, and story, so that the developers could focus on refining puzzles and introducing new gimmicks to differentiate every entry. Beginning with A Link to the Past, the 1991 Zelda game, the essential elements to defining the Zelda formula were in place. From then on, future titles would have a dual world, two different ways of understanding the world of Hyrule. Sometimes Link could travel between two versions of Hyrule, but most of the time Link would have two different methods of exploring. Ocarina of Time's dual world involved playing as both child Link and adult Link, wherein there would be drastic tonal differences between the two time periods of Hyrule. Twilight Princess had two gameplay styles for the player, Human Link and Wolf Link, each having their own unique abilities. Skyward Sword featured two unique worlds again, like A Link to the Past, the sky and the surface. The next convention set by the 1991 Zelda game was the structure of dungeons that would continue for over 2 decades. Dungeons would be labyrinthian puzzles which would be difficult to navigate until defeating a difficult enemy, called a mini-boss. Defeating the mini-boss would grant Link an item that allowed him to unlock all rooms in the dungeon and defeat the boss, progressing the main story, often through obtaining a MacGuffin like a pearl, medallion, song, or instrument. There were other minor conventions the Zelda team followed, like epic, memorable music, linear story progression, etc. But the main point to remember is that each new entry would iterate, not innovate. Swordplay in Skyward Sword feels like Twilight Princess, which feels like The Wind Waker, which feels like Majora's Mask, which feels like Ocarina of Time, which doesn't feel like what came before. In terms of combat, Ocarina of Time was an evolution of A Link to the Past, like how Breath of the Wild was an evolution to the combat for the former Zelda formula. I was hoping that Nintendo would continue to defy convention, like they did with Breath of the Wild. But it seems history is doomed to repeat itself. After about 5 years of development, there are relatively few combat changes in Tears of the Kingdom. The few there are all benefit the combat and enhance the nigh limitless options you have to massacre bokoblins, moblins, and now Koroks. All the problems with combat lie in what hasn't changed. The Zelda team decided to change a few minute problems from Breath of the Wild while ignoring significant balancing issues which cause any late-game challenge to become laughably lazy. Flurry Rush, a mechanic which lets you counterattack after barely dodging an enemy's attack, has had some tweaks, though they're difficult to notice at first. Flurry Rush from the previous game was a secret technique you could discover whenever you dodged at the proper time. The fighting technique was hidden, not explicitly taught in the tutorial area, and there was only one shrine out of 120 that outlined what a Flurry Rush was, including its combat applications. The calculations and checks for a valid Flurry Rush are also different in Breath of the Wild. Flurry Rush in 2017 acted like a reward for a combat puzzle. Link can dodge in 4 directions: forward, left, right, or back, while enemies have 3 types of attacks: horizontal slashes, vertical slashes, and undodgeable attacks. The system checks whether the enemy attack is in motion. If so, then the next check occurs. Is Link dodging? If yes, is Link using the correct type of dodge? For example, the correct response for a vertical slash would be a horizontal dodge, and the correct response for a horizontal slash would be a vertical dodge. When the answer to all the previous questions is yes, the game activates Flurry Rush, allowing you to counterattack with whatever weapon of your choice in quick succession, giving the enemy no opportunities to return a blow. Undodgeable attacks were special moves that you had to block, with no way to activate Flurry Rush, like when a bokoblin spins its club around in the air. At least, I've never been able to accomplish, or see someone else accomplish, a Flurry Rush against this type of attack in my over 800 hours of gameplay without glitches. Believe me, I've tried. The 3 checks in place may sound functional, like there would be no problems with the system, but you couldn't be more wrong. There is a generous check in Breath of the Wild for proximity to the attacking enemy when activating a Flurry Rush, meaning that if an enemy swings while you're perpendicular to them, you can dodge at a distance far away from any danger, and activate a Flurry Rush. Flurry Rush is supposed to be a combat reward that deals great damage to the enemy at the risk of taking significant damage yourself. When you can completely ignore any risks associated, the only aspect left is a great reward with no chance for punishment, an ultimately meaningless game with no struggle for you to overcome. There is at least a radius that prevents you from activating Flurry Rush when outside of combat, but otherwise, you can activate the technique at your will, as long as at least one enemy is attacking you. My first clue that Flurry Rush received some changes has to do with that spinning attack that bokoblins do. The first time I saw a bokoblin wind up its weapon, I decided to try a Flurry Rush. I waited, anticipating failure and a lost heart container. As the bokoblin trudged over, I was ready to be disappointed. I backflip, and lo and behold, I activate Flurry Rush. On my first try, no less. Now, what were the other changes to Flurry Rush? That's it. You can still activate a Flurry Rush long after an enemy's attack finishes, negating any risk involved in this ostensible risk-reward fighting mechanic. You can still activate Flurry Rush even when you're far away from any danger. Worse yet, arguably the most reliable melee weapon type in the game, the Royal tier, receives a damage bonus when attacking during a Flurry Rush. Not only is the mechanic effortless to activate, but it's even more powerful than in Breath of the Wild because in the last third of my playthrough, Royal tier weapons were so common that I was desperately trying to deplete their durability as fast as possible, lest my weapons pouch be too full to carry new, more interesting weapon types. The next significant change to the combat lies outside of the moment-to-moment gameplay, instead being responsible for the new experience system in Tears of the Kingdom. If you've completed the game, however, you may rightfully reply, there isn't an experience system. That's only half true. The million rupee question of many a combat system is, what's the point of experience? RPGs, even before video games, utilized experience as a tangible, objective mark of progress. The more experience you have, the more monsters you've defeated and land you've explored. Your progression, exploration, and combat grace you with greater, stronger powers too, which feels like the most universal aspect to a single RPG. Every game grants you higher stats, making you or your character objectively more capable than what you fought before. But RPGs give specialized rewards too, based on the individual game. Pokemon grants your monsters stronger moves, Minecraft gives you monster drops, the Mother series has more powerful PSI abilities, Xenoblade has skill tree points, Kingdom Hearts grants you an almost infinite catalog of abilities, Persona and Shin Megami Tensei give you the opportunity to recruit monsters and upgrade your arsenal. Actually, let's stop at that last one for a moment. Each of these examples are motivators, reasons for you to engage in optional combat scenarios. Without them, combat has no incentive outside of the intrinsic enjoyment or dopamine you'd get. Breath of the Wild had a secret XP system, whereby defeated enemies would grant XP points based on the difficulty of the monster. After reaching certain XP thresholds, common enemies would transform into more powerful versions, being bulkier and dealing more damage. When I mention experience, I'm not referring to this secret XP system. I'm talking about guts. Monster guts. Their horns, teeth, hearts, tails, wings, and otherwise are experience points. Experience points in the aforementioned RPGs are received after defeating an enemy, and they allow players to upgrade their defensive and offensive capabilities. In any game without a traditional EXP system, whatever items appear from the enemy's corpse become experience points. How do you equate quantitative experience points from RPGs to the monster parts of Zelda? Let's see what the practical uses of monster parts are to answer that question. In Breath of the Wild, upgrading the defensive attributes of Link's armor requires monster parts of varying amounts, based on how much you want to upgrade your gear. To better understand the direct connection between experience points and monster parts, let's assign a numerical value to each part. A single bokoblin horn equals 1 point. Upgrading the Hylian hood to its first tier requires 5 points of experience. To further upgrade the hood, you'll need 8 points as well as 5 points worth of bokoblin fangs. Unlike stereotypical RPGs which use a single currency of experience points, each monster part is its own currency. Managing each currency is the key to upgrading equipment successfully. In terms of currencies and numerical point values, there are a total of 50 different monster currencies needed to upgrade all of Link's equipment. Not all 50 different types are needed at once, and most armor sets utilize 2 to 3 of the same currency type. Regardless, viewing each type of monster part as its own experience point currency reveals that Breath of the Wild does have an EXP system, just not in the traditional method with a single universal currency that affects offensive and defensive attributes at the same time. While monster parts substitute the role of defensive experience points, they don't function well as a substitute for offensive experience points. Monster parts don't allow you to upgrade your weapons, and the most offensive capable utility they have is crafting a new, unique weapon, mainly ancient weapons crafted with guardian part currencies. Even then, only a select few monster parts, or select few currencies, can help create weapons. The only offensive-oriented item that drops upon defeating an enemy is their melee or ranged weapon. Weapons with different attack values being the only form of offensive player progression is fine at first, but worrisome later on. Unknown exciting weapons abound during the first half of the game, but there's a singularity in regards to weapons. A point where Link's inventory is bursting with the best weapons that have the best modifiers. And what does an enemy encampment have? Subpar weapons with weaker attack values, with weapon modifiers of variable value, and long throw. No one wants a longer throwing range. The optimal and encouraged solution then is to ignore enemy encounters because, when thinking of weapons as offensive experience points, fighting monsters makes you weaker than before. You essentially lose experience points from fighting more common monsters like bokoblins, moblins, and Lizalfos in the later half of Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom decided to make a simple, significant change to the monster part experience system that forever altered the trajectory of extrinsic motivation. Monster parts grant defensive and offensive experience. The same defensive boons of upgrading armor with dozens of different currency types remain, but monster horns have high attack values when fused to a weapon, meaning that Link gains a significant increase to his offensive output when attaching an item, like a monster horn, to his weaponry. Therefore, you consistently gain offensive experience when defeating every enemy, even the weakest ones like a red bokoblin. Unlike defensive experience points where every currency type has the same value of 1 point for each individual ingredient, offensive experience points retain the same variety of currency, with rarer monster parts having higher point values. These so-called experience point values, for the sake of discussion, will be the additional damage value you receive when fusing a weapon and a monster part together. A standard bokoblin horn has a damage and experience point value of 4. A blue bokoblin horn is worth 7 experience points. A black bokoblin horn is worth 17 experience points, a silver bokoblin horn is worth 31 experience points, so on and so forth. The central conundrum when viewing monster parts as a different version of experience points is managing Link's level. Traditional RPG leveling systems enhance the character in a linear order from level 1 to 99 or another intended maximum level. Leveling up your character in these traditional RPGs means that they deal more damage and take less damage. If the intent of levels is the increasing or decreasing of dealing and receiving damage, then whatever changes these attributes for Link becomes his own level of sorts. Armor upgrades are linear and static, unable to change after investing the appropriate currencies of experience, acting like the traditional system of linear leveling in RPGs. Conversely, Link's offensive output is variable, dependent on the weapon and attached material, not all of which will be equal. Still, even variable offensive experience is enough to provide more enticing extrinsic rewards for defeating monsters. With the new extrinsic motivators, and the modified, if you can call it that, flurry rush, Why do I still believe that Tears of the Kingdom favors intrinsically motivated players far more than extrinsically motivated players? There are two particular reasons, both of which are intertwined. Everything that didn't change, and the Revenge of the Zelda formula. Melee options have not changed since Breath of the Wild, which isn't too troublesome considering how unconventional melee combat is. In other action or action RPG games like Dark Souls, players have multiple attack options, light or heavy. Attack options compound when you factor in different weapon types, swords, greatswords, spears, spells, etc. Multiply the two together and the result is a plethora of attack options to approach any combat encounter. Even when sticking to a single weapon type, there are different use cases for both light and heavy attacks. Fighting games, experiences with some of the most robust combat systems, have several attack types. Street Fighter, possibly the most well-known 2D fighting game, has several attack types. Light, medium, and heavy variants for two attack types, those being punches and kicks. How can the Zelda series create a complex battle system with a single attack button? The lie of combat in the new Zelda game is that there is only a single attack option. Why? Untrue as it is, there is only one attack button on the controller, yet there are light, medium, and heavy attacks. Just not in the traditional sense where each variant receives a dedicated button. Traditional attack types of light, medium, and heavy are tied to weapons instead of player commands. Spears are your light attack, one-handed swords are your medium attack, and two-handed swords are your heavy attack. Each weapon follows the same attack string, which is what we'd call, in other games, a combo. Traditional combos are a mix of light, medium, and heavy attacks, but combos in Tears of the Kingdom cannot mix together. You pick a type of combo and execute it. Combat complexity lies not in the attack strings themselves, but how individual weapons can modify each of the individual combos. One change from Breath of the Wild I haven't fully disclosed yet is that different weapon tiers have special perks which enhance certain aspects of combat. Soldier tier weapons, for example, require significantly less time to execute a charged attack. Attach an ice-infused material to a soldier's broadsword, and Link will have a fast, crowd control attack that freezes all enemies in place. An interaction that can only exist because of how personalized each weapon is. The Eightfold Longblade is a two-handed weapon dropped by Yiga clan assassins. Its unique ability creates a slash of wind which carries forward past the initial attack. Attach a fire-infused horn, and you send out waves of fire at your enemies. The Royal Guard's Claymore is a popular weapon of choice against the fearsome Lynels. When the weapon is close to breaking, it gains a significant boost to its damage output. Successfully mount a Lynel and you can slay the beast in a few hits with a high attack power horn, because attacking a Lynel while mounted expends no durability. Unique interactions don't cease there, however. Other variants of what I described and more exist. It may be limited now, but Tears of the Kingdom attempts to add combat depth by allowing Link to have customizable attacks. Only one attack combo is permitted, but switching between different attacks can happen freely. Well, as long as you're patient, because the weapon wheel takes an eternity to load in a new weapon. Choosing between seemingly infinite types of attack strings seems like the perfect recipe for creating combat depth from the baseline that was Breath of the Wild. If only it were true, because Link's attack options are still limited. There are 14 passive abilities tied to every weapon, some of which are unique and some of which improve your damage output. The Royal tier weapons are possibly the most boring of these abilities, with their simple damage buff to the already imbalanced Flurry Rush. Sturdy wooden weapons increase durability, a pretty pointless ability considering weapons are more durable than ever with the fuse mechanic. Demolisher, an ability unique to Goron-type weapons, feels pointless considering all blunt weapons can destroy most any rock in one attack. There are more durable rock clusters, but they're so few and far between that the Demolisher ability is too niche to be useful. Enhanced Sneak Strike is found only on Eightfold Blades, yet another passive buff which doesn't change how you approach combat. The most unique abilities are Fuse Recycling, Fast Charge Attack, and Desperate Strength. The first ability transforms your weapon into an extended supply of any material that's considered explosive. These include Puff Shrooms, which explode into a cloud of smoke, Dazzle Fruit, which create a sudden sudden flash of light, and muddlebutts, which trick enemies into fighting each other. Said weapon isn't useful for dealing significant damage, but it inflicts invaluable status effects for crowd control while conserving materials. Fast Charge Attack is a passive ability, but it enables quick status effect application for fire, ice, and lightning elemental weapons. Desperate Strength is the most intense of these weapon abilities, establishing a high-risk, high-reward approach to combat. Enemies may fall to 1 or 2 swings, but so do you. Sadly, that's it. Those are all the unique abilities tied to weapons. There is nowhere near enough significant weapon individuality to add sufficient depth to melee combat. It is only a small iteration on what came before. In fact, it's so similar I could swear I was playing a different version of Breath of the Wild. The one question I kept returning to was this: why didn't Nintendo change more about the combat? The answer is not new, it's an ancient problem that has arisen yet again. The Zelda formula has arisen, back from the grave like a zombie, wandering mindlessly to consume and replicate. After the release of Ocarina of Time in 1998, the combat for the series thereafter was mostly unchanged. There would be slightly varied enemy designs and combat quirks to differentiate each entry, not too dissimilar to modern Pokemon gimmicks. Majora's Mask had different forms for Link to attack with, The Wind Waker had reaction commands, Twilight Princess had unique melee skills, and Skyward Sword had directional swinging and enemy blocking. Although there's not a definitive pattern yet, the same has so far repeated with Breath of the Wild and its most recent installment. The former provided the basis of combat, while Tears of the Kingdom added the fuse mechanic to diversify weapon attacks. Considering the comments made by Eiji Aonuma, the general producer of the Zelda series, and Hidemaru Fujibayashi, the director for the recent 3D Zelda games, Breath of the Wild, like Ocarina of Time before it, is the new Zelda formula. To what extent they will repeat the formula is unknown, but official interviews from Nintendo themselves point to a more concerning problem. One where unchanged combat is merely a symptom of a vision much too grand. Deja vu was what the developers labeled it. The feeling that Tears of the Kingdom felt too familiar, too similar, too much like its predecessor. I don't know how vocal this concern was, but Aonuma Fujibayashi and Satoru Takizawa discussed that they struggled in deciding whether to change something or keep it the same. Their ultimate rationale for leaving an aspect unchanged was to keep the feeling of, oh, that's a Legend of Zelda game. If preserving identity is so important to this series then, what is a Legend of Zelda game? Is it a combat-centric open world? Is it a lively Hyrule with hundreds of stories to experience? Is it a prescriptive game with a set order of events? Is it a physics playground for torturing Koroks? What does a Zelda game need to be? Are you ready? Because I think the answer will blow your mind. Whatever it wants, what an absurd question. Zelda has always been about adventure, but there is no single way to have an adventure, hence the variety in art styles, tones, gameplay, and music throughout the entire franchise. The Legend of Zelda is free to be whatever type of game it wants to be. To me, Breath of the Wild was definitive proof that a Zelda game is not shackled to a specific setting, gameplay focus, control scheme, story, music, or structure. Any entry thereafter could be anything it wants to be. Tears of the Kingdom could have been anything it wanted to be, and Nintendo chose the safest, blandest option possible. Breath of the Wild, again. I think this is where Nintendo and I disagree, because as much as Breath of the Wild was about breaking down sacrosanct walls and traditions, Tears of the Kingdom is about rebuilding new walls and conventions. As Eiji Aonuma puts it in a developer interview on Nintendo's website, breaking boundaries doesn't mean you can just destroy whatever you like, though. Those boundaries give you the basis to feel safe about taking risks elsewhere. In spite of being an intrinsically motivated player, the near-identical melee options disincentivize me from engaging in combat encounters. Novelty does drive this new open-world structure, and lacking depth or novelty prevents me from being motivated to play as much as when I first explored this incarnation of Hyrule.
They are out there at this moment, whispering amongst themselves that you are the heir to a throne of nothing, nothing but failure. It is woven into your destiny that you prove them wrong. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
Zelda stories aren't good. How many times have you heard something to that effect when discussing the Zelda series online? In my case, I've heard it too many times. It may be the most common critical consensus regarding the storytelling of this legendary franchise. But why then do so many people resonate with the stories of Link, Zelda, and company? Why are there entire videos discussing the characters of games like Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, and Link's Awakening? The reason is that the characters are what resonates with people the most. Or at least they do for me. I'm never exhilarated by the plot. Link accomplishing something epic feels much more powerful when it's ludic, something that Tears of the Kingdom leverages well. The other, possibly compelling piece of non-interactive narrative, besides the plot, are the characters. People online have voiced frustration over Breath of the Wild's story, or lack thereof, claiming that the story is underwhelming because a majority of the cutscenes occur in the past. There isn't really a strong plot since almost all of the story is optional, but that's the cost of prioritizing player individuality and freedom. Most people in this discussion are not talking about ludic stories. They're talking about non-interactive stories. Cutscenes, talking with NPCs, and set pieces are what a majority of people envision when imagining a story in video games. To that end, the only thing I remember about the non-interactive story in Breath of the Wild was Princess Zelda. Her struggles, her conflicts, her outbursts, and her growth are emblematic of understanding how to create dynamic, complex characters through non-linear storytelling. Princess Zelda's story was dissected into 18 segments, where the first half displays a reluctant, sassy, prone to outburst version of the character. The second half presents a Zelda that is open, caring, and inquisitive. Only one of these 18 segments in the middle depicts her change of heart, the moment when she learns to trust the one who is always beside her, Link. Players can collect any fragment, except for one final memory which bridges everything together to the present. Because there are two almost polar opposite personalities for Zelda, a non-linear collection of these stories makes sense. It creates uncertainty and intrigue. I first met Zelda at her lowest point, despairing over her inability to awaken her powers as Ganon itself reawakens. Yet a single memory later, she is a hesitant, hateful person despising Link, scolding him, trying to escape him at every turn. With a stark difference of character, I became curious. How did Zelda end up like this? What happened to the princess to make her at least tolerate Link's presence? It was too dramatic of a shift for me to ignore. There were explorations of minor characters like the original champions for the Gorons, Zora, Rito, and Gerudo, but there's never enough attention given to them. The spotlight is always on Zelda, and with good reason. Focusing on a single character while being mindful of the non-linear collection structure means that character conflict, outbursts, and changes can receive more focus than plot or scope. Tears of the Kingdom is already dead set on mirroring its predecessor, so who is our central character for the new set of 18 memories? Actually, it's 17 memories, because one of them is the introduction to the game. Scratch that 16 memories, since two of them occur one after the other, something Breath of the Wild never did, having every memory occur at a different place and time. 16 memories, less than the first, to develop a central character. Who is that central character? I don't know. I still don't know after completing the game, because it seems like there are 4 principal characters in the memories: Zelda, Rauru, Sonia, and Ganondorf. Developing 4 characters in less time than it took to successfully develop a single character in the last game is more than a tall order. It's a Hinox-sized order. Did the team pull it off, though? Not by a long shot. Zelda feels pretty static. Her journey is a trial of dedication, where she learns to sacrifice her own being to stop Ganondorf. Though not really, because there can't be anything of actual consequence. So, the emotional core for this non-interactive story was Rauru. Rauru is a perplexing character. His story is ostensibly focused on pride and its detrimental effects. The entire story, as the development team put it, was about hands. Hands that reach out and help you, promising to arrive when the need is dire. Tears of the Kingdom's emotional core is about the following question: what happens when people don't reach out for help? Rauru's foil is Ganondorf, another ruler who never reaches out for assistance from anyone. Ganondorf's solitary kingship manifests more dramatically, with him discarding the Gerudo people once he acquires a secret stone, aka what should have been called a sacred tear because it's the entire name and brand of the game, even being a name used for fragments of holy power in other games within the Zelda series. Rauru's inability to trust people initially is understated. He refuses to bequeath the secret stones to other people. He has a sudden change of heart when Queen Sonia dies, however. Ganondorf declares in that moment that it was Raru's pride which led to this turn of events. Defeated, Raru decides to trust in those around him, the sages, his sister, Princess Zelda, and someone he will not meet for thousands of years, Link. Now that sounds like a dynamic character with a change in personality so specific that collecting later or earlier memories will alter how players connect with him. By all accounts, Raru should be the Princess Zelda of these non-interactive stories. And yet, the old king's journey feels contradictory to what actually occurs. King Raru is capable of trusting people, proven by his willingness to give his partner, Sonia, a non-Zonai, one of the Zonai's secret stones, a relic previously exclusive to his near-extinct race. Raru is given her unfathomable power before Zelda even arrives, before his character's introduction. Even by the start of his story, Raru trusts people. He is not prideful, he's not solitary. He has reached out to someone else to help him nurture the infant kingdom of Hyrule. He not only bequeathed power to Sonia, but he made a vow to be by her side. Not a sage's vow like those Link collects, but a lover's vow, a wedding vow. Raru has already learned his lesson about the danger of pride before his story ever started. So what else is there for him to learn? Nothing. The answer is nothing. The same lesson he learned before is what he learns again. Potentially, him withholding a secret stone from Sonia could have established him as being distrustful of others. It would have meant that he was reluctant to give powerful Zonai artifacts to non-Zonai people. With a minor change like that, Princess Zelda's possession of a secret stone from the future could be a point of character conflict between her and the erstwhile king. Ganondorf's blaming of Raru for the death of Sonia would have had actual merit. Furthermore, Raru's final declaration,
"That pride will be your downfall, Ganondorf!"
would have been more meaningful. It would have signified a learned lesson from him about why he should trust others, why he should trust in the vows he makes with other people. Ganondorf is the next candidate for our principal character, and he almost steals the spotlight. This incarnation of the Demon King is menacing, more than ever before. He will not hesitate to lie, steal, kill, and manipulate his way to the top. Not to mention his omnipresence when fighting gloom-wreathed monsters, enemies powered up by Ganondorf himself. Despite his stage-stealing presence, I struggle to call him the emotional hook, because I could not tell you what his motivations are, why he lies, steals, kills, and manipulates his way to the top. Calamity Ganon was similarly motiveless, but being the embodiment of an emotion like malice, what motivation should there be? Calamity Ganon is an emotion, a feeling. It existed because of hatred, and that's all it needed to be, a force to jumpstart the journeys of our central characters, helped with Princess Zelda being the emotional focal point of the memories. Ganondorf is not an emotion or a feeling, he's a person. He has justifications for what he does, all human characters do, even the ones whose motivation is boredom or sadistic nihilism. Ruling over Hyrule is his ultimate goal, and he even explicitly states so during the final confrontation. He must be king of this land, not anyone else. But why? What does he gain from becoming king? Is it status? Is it to run the kingdom of Hyrule differently? Is it purely political differences between him and Raru? Is he maybe a revolutionary who believes monarchies are inherently evil? Any of these reasons could be compelling, yet there is never a hint of his true desires. He's willing to kill legions of people for his goals, so he must have something compelling, a reason for why he chooses to be a sadistic, menacing killer who abandons even his own people, the Gerudo. There is, however, a brief moment where Ganondorf asserts his intentions clearly. Once Link has held off the Demon King in the final confrontation, Ganondorf gives up. Anger festers inside him, pulses through his veins, manipulates his brain, diverts his attention from his goal of ruling over Hyrule that he's had for millennia. Now, his pride will not permit Link, the measly runt of a Hylian, to live. He finally has something he did not for thousands of years, a motive, a reason to do something, a reason to chew the forbidden gummy and become a dragon. It's a shame this explicit mention of motivation never occurred for the Ganondorf who had his sights set on ruling Hyrule. Maybe I was too hopeful for having a compelling villain in a series which has historically had complex characters. But there is one quest I'd be remiss not to mention. The Mysterious Eighth is a side quest in Gerudo Town that deals with the true identity behind a forbidden legend. In the previous game, we learned that there were statues dedicated to 7 heroines who protected Gerudo Town in their most desperate hour. There is, in actuality, an 8th statue, hidden away in the snowy Gerudo Highlands. Why was there one heroine isolated from the rest? Was this a prank? Why is this the only statue missing its sword? Any answer was speculative at that point. The new side quest in Tears of the Kingdom reveals a hidden secret, written on a tablet inside of a cave, now only accessible after the upheaval revealed all of the underground cave systems in Hyrule. The ancient writing states that the 8th heroine was male, a man helping the Gerudo. Where have I heard this before? Oh, silly me, it's Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. In 1998, Ganondorf led the Gerudo tribe to battle, inciting the Hyrulean Civil War. Details are unclear on whether he lost or surrendered, but the end result was Ganondorf swearing fealty to the King of Hyrule. The reason behind Ganondorf's plight were unknown until The Wind Waker, wherein the same Ganondorf, not a reincarnation, states that he coveted the winds of the Kingdom of Hyrule, which were gentler than those of the Gerudo Desert. How I interpreted his speech about wind was that the Gerudo Desert was a resource-scarce land, and Ganondorf went to war in order to secure a more plentiful land for his people, a noble goal achieved through unethical means. With all the equipment in the depths being references to previous Zelda games, I thought this quest was yet another connection to, or at least a mirroring of, Ganondorf's past. It was so similar. Considering that the Gerudo know about and despise the history of Ganondorf, there would also be a rationale for hiding the existence of the 8th heroine. Exonerating Ganondorf was shameful after his decimation of Hyrule and abandonment of the Gerudo. It all aligned perfectly, except for the fact that the 8th heroine is in actuality a Hylian Vo, who parallels Link's relationship with the Gerudo people more than Ganondorf's. The one hint at Ganondorf's motivation, squashed in the blink of an eye. I saved the most static candidate for last, Queen Sonia. Having the least screen time of the 4, she feels more like a catalyst for developing other characters than being the principal one in her own right. Sonia's maternal relationship with Zelda is what inspires the princess to, as far as she knows, give up her own life so that Link can defeat Ganondorf. The late Queen's passing is also supposed to be the trigger for Raru's journey to trust people other than the Zonai, though that journey doesn't work out for other reasons. The only potential hook I can envision besides a character exploration is the plot. Relishing in the epic, grandiose scale of the setting is the last aspect I can envision which would motivate me to engage with this non-interactive collection of stories. Epic fantasy is something that captivates me, I'll admit, but Zelda is not grandiose enough to satisfy that desire. I may love the unfathomable scale of the battles in the Lord of the Rings films, yet Tears of the Kingdom does not commit to an epic story with grand stakes and elaborately constructed set pieces. Scenes are few and far between, the maximum number of characters in a scene is 8, and the memories are meant to be short. So short they end prematurely, like an anxious friend who doesn't want to overstay their welcome, despite the fact that you'd love for them to stay as long as possible. Being one of, I assume, 2 people online who actually appreciated the storytelling structure of Breath of the Wild, it is frustrating to see such a lack of care for the characters within Tears of the Kingdom. That's the only way I can put it, because after having absolute faith that an expanded Hyrule would lead to an expanded story, the end result is disappointingly obvious. The former already suffered from a formulaic main quest. Every main dungeon in that game, called a Divine Beast, had the same structure of events with little variation. Reclaiming a Divine Beast ultimately only changed the world in minor ways. Completing the main quest in Breath of the Wild left me starving for more. In response to the criticisms of a formulaic, inconsequential story, Tears of the Kingdom decided to have an even more formulaic story where the faceless, personless mentors task people who have no personal investment or obligation to join with the responsibility of taking down Ganondorf, the Demon King. Wait, Demon King? Secret Stone? Worry not, because all will be explained 5 times over. I remember a time when the mentors had personalities and a history. I remember when the mentors had relationships. I remember when the Descendants had a personal stake in completing a dungeon. It seems Nintendo forgot about that relic of the past. 2017 was a long time ago after all. I remember in my youth, I'd hear younger Xbox and PlayStation gamers complain that all Nintendo games, especially Zelda games, have the same story. The claim was always rubbish to me, but for this latest entry, those juvenile arguments ring more true than ever. In both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, you awaken in a strange resurrection chamber. A mysterious character guides you on the Great Sky Island, directing you toward the shrines with the promise of a way to leave the starting plateau to explore the vast kingdom of Hyrule, while not so subtly directing you toward the Temple of Time. Our wise, unknown friend happens to be a former king of Hyrule. After our kingly companion disappears, we visit Impa, who kickstarts our quest to collect 18 memories that shed some light upon the truth behind the Great Calamity. Not before visiting the main village that the game not so subtly nudges us toward. During a visit to the suggested village, a Sheikah figurehead tasks Link with helping the 4 major villages solve their unique problem. Those being Zora's Domain, Goron City, Rito Village, and Gerudo Town. Link's trip to each settlement requires him to complete an extended shrine, where he must activate 5 to 4 terminals in any order before confronting the boss. After resolving the conflict in each town, you discover the existence of a 5th dungeon that involves preliminary trials and quests before you access it. The boss of the final dungeon relates to the history of each game's respective ancient people that are a now-gone civilization. Only their advanced technology remains, technology which Link has used to solve puzzles throughout his adventure. Inside, Link confronts the erstwhile construct of Sheikah monk. Completing all dungeons rewards Link with a new vehicular mode of transportation that can be summoned nearly everywhere in Hyrule, with few exceptions. All that remains is for Link to confront Calamity Ganondorf after defeating all remaining bosses that were skipped from the main story. Upon Ganon's defeat, Link travels to an open area to fight a bestial version of Ganondorf in a tenseless fight with lots of spectacle. If you completed everything I outlined in your own playthrough as well, you'll get to experience the true ending, a final cutscene where any lingering spirits fade away into the great beyond, with Zelda promising to rebuild and maybe expand the Kingdom of Hyrule. On top of having identical suggested story structures, each game's respective ancient civilization serves the same functions. An even sadder fate considering what a mystery the Zonai used to be. Prior to Tears of the Kingdom, the Zonai were a mysterious tribe of people, whose only ruins that remained were the 3 labyrinths and their bestial monuments in the Faron region. They erected monuments of dragons, owls, and boars, the purpose of which was unknown. That was all the concrete knowledge we knew about this ancient tribe. Fans would theorize about what the Zonai tribe was with the limited knowledge available. In extended material, though, there was an explanation. Creating a Champion, a supplemental book about the developmental and narrative secrets of Breath of the Wild, confirmed that the monuments were an animalistic version of the Triforce. The dragon represented courage, the owl represented wisdom, and the boar represented power. Moreover, the people of Hyrule believed that the Zonai tribe were magic wielders. The second belief was less grounded in any evidence, but it would have made the Zonai a different kind of ancient people compared to the Sheikah. Nintendo, in a public interview, stated that they initially wanted for the Zonai to appear more magical. Quote, "The initial concept of this game was to use the supernatural power of an unknown civilization, as opposed to the Sheikah civilization's super ancient technology in the previous game. So we decided to create lots of handy items with magical properties. However, even if we describe these items as supernatural, players won't use them unless they know what they are. So this thing we were calling magic ultimately became an electric fan." End quote. The end result makes the Zonai seem technologically savvy instead of magically savvy. The Zonai are the Sheikah again, an ancient race who have all disappeared from Hyrule, the only remnants being their ancient technology. There are some thankful nuances to differentiate the Sheikah and Zonai. Their in-game architecture act as pastiches to real-life artistic time periods, and from the little we know about Zonai culture, the two lived incredibly different lives. Most of the history we learn about in Tears of the Kingdom relays the culture and norms of Hyrule's infancy, a time where the only Zonai alive were Rauru and Minoru. There isn't a Zonai Kakariko village to explore how their culture behaved, nor conversations with Rauru about how the Zonai became extinct, or who they were beyond anthropomorphic goats, I guess. There isn't a reason why swallowing a sacred tear, I am not calling it a secret stone, is forbidden. There isn't a cultural conflict like the secession of the Yiga clan. There are more new details about Zonai culture in creating a champion than in Tears of the Kingdom. There are contradictions within Zonai history based on developments in this sequel, i.e., how come the ancient hero of 10,000 years ago who fought against Calamity Ganon looks like a Zonai when Rauru and Minoru, who both die without having any offspring, to our knowledge, are the last two Zonai. That's without mentioning the assumption that a Zonai and Hylian are compatible enough to have children together. And if that's true, how come the Hylians of the ancient past look identical to the Hylians of the present? How can Princess Zelda perfectly understand Rauru and Sonia when the side quest with Wordsworth about translating ancient Hyrulean implies that the language of Hyrule's founding sounds nothing like modern Hyrulean? How can that happen when Wordsworth even speaks ancient Hyrulean to Link, demonstrating that the language is almost incomprehensible to the contemporary Hyrulean language? How can Sheikah technology magically disappear? How come there are still Guardian remnants after their ostensible disappearance? If the technology disappeared, how come there are no cavities where the Hyrule Castle pillars used to reside? How come minor characters like stable managers can remember Link but not Beetle, the most frequented shop owner from the past game? All of these questions and contradictions exist without even mentioning the official Zelda timeline, and how the existence of referential items from the series' history conflicts with the pre-established diverging timelines. If the contemporary Zelda games are meant to be a part of a separate continuity though, how come the official Japanese website for the series lists Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom at the end of every possible timeline, like some kind of inevitable convergence? The Zelda series has always been geographically and historically inconsistent, so instead of beating it, let's leave the dead horse to rest in peace. The history of the Zonai, which is the new history added in Tears of the Kingdom, falls into two categories: a repetition of the predecessor, or a contradictory, implausible, underdeveloped addition. Déjà vu is too subdued a word to come close to describing what I experienced. For most, a near-identical story with personality-starved characters is not a problem, because, for most, they play Zelda games for completely different reasons than myself. For me, there are 5 reasons I enjoy this series: player freedom, epic battles, puzzles, an adventurous spirit, and, yes, compelling characters. If it's not the characters, I crave something epic, high stakes, and elaborate. Not every entry fulfills my needs for all 5, but the previous game did. Breath of the Wild satiated my desire for a free adventure with tense fights, somewhat complicated puzzles, ludic stories tailored toward my individual experience, and even compelling characters in the inquisitive Zelda, the regretful King Rome, the maternal Urbosa, the little shithead Rivali, and the inexplicably handsome Sidon. After finishing the non-interactive story in Tears of the Kingdom, I realized that Nintendo, over the past decade they've spent creating this same incarnation of Hyrule, has become that anxiety-ridden friend. I want them to stay longer, to tell me more about Ganondorf, about Rauru, about Sonia, about Hyrule itself. For some reason, though, they think that doing so would make things awkward, when in reality, it would be anything but. I can reassure them of their value as much as possible, but what they really need is time for self-reflection and a whole lot of therapy. What I'll remember more than anything from this repeated retread of the former entry is disappointment. I'll remember the potential of a dynamic Rauru. I'll remember the menacing but ultimately hollow Ganondorf. Above all, I'll remember the apathy from hearing the same story 5 times from faceless puppets who are more vapid than a steward construct. A literal robot. I play games for many reasons, but one of them is to be dumbfounded, ridiculed, and made a fool of. In other words, I like a good puzzle. A good puzzle, for me, requires 3 different attributes to be puzzling. First, there needs to be a but. A but not that kind, is a predicament where the player can identify where they need to go, or what they need to accomplish, but there's a barrier that prevents them from completing their goal. Most shrines in Tears of the Kingdom require the player to go somewhere, usually the shrine terminal, but there is a gap or a pillar of stone or an unclimbable wall or a gear rotating in the wrong direction. Each of these buts are the basic conundrums of shrines, being the problems of the initial tutorial puzzles on the Great Sky Island. To cross the gap, you can use Ultra Hand to build a bridge. To pass through the pillars of stone, you can fuse a boulder to your weapon, creating a makeshift hammer. To surpass the unclimbable wall, you can ascend through a cavity at the base. To make it past the gear, you can use recall, rewinding its movements. But there needs to be more complexity to any puzzle. I wouldn't call any of the puzzles in the tutorial shrines revolutionary, because the second part of creating a good puzzle is noise. Noise consists of elements that obscure the solution to a puzzle, which is called the signal. Without noise, puzzle solutions become overwhelmingly obvious. As it would so happen, puzzles without any noise are the most common experience in Breath of the Wild, and now Tears of the Kingdom. Take a look at the Trial of Power Shrine in Hyrule Field from Breath of the Wild. In it, there's a boulder sitting atop a wooden platform, featuring a vine overgrowth that spans to the floor, conveniently below a hanging lantern. Because vines are never in a shrine unless they help you solve the puzzle at hand, I figured that I needed to burn them. I shot an arrow at the rope, which suspended the lantern above the floor. But before I could even comprehend the importance of burning those vines, a boulder fell and busted down a stone door that led me to the next puzzle. This boulder puzzle in Trial of Power is a puzzle without any noise, only the signal, the essential elements to complete the puzzle. The vines, the fire, the boulder, and the door. Why create a puzzle without any noise, though? Superficially, it seems rushed, as if the developers needed to create the puzzles as fast as possible. Well, that isn't exactly the case. Nintendo created 120 different shrines, each with their own requirements and puzzles and combat encounters and environments. No matter how developed a concept was, there must be a new kind of puzzle for every shrine. The uniform interiors are the required concession needed to create so many puzzles. Designing 120 unique interiors for small puzzles, which can take as little as a minute of your time, is unfathomable. However, without enough noise within puzzles, they become easy, mindless, and, when you can complete 120 of them, tedious. The final piece of the puzzle is balance. Puzzles in older Zelda games often accepted a single solution, what we would call a planned solution. But in Tears of the Kingdom, there are a plethora of solutions to a single problem. Returning to the tutorial puzzles, you don't have to craft a bridge with Ultra Hand to cross the vast chasm between you and your prize. You can bounce into the air with a bomb shield, you can surf across a rail, you can build a makeshift chairlift, you can attach two hooks together, climb onto your creation, and ride your way across the gap in the floor. Zelda has so many solutions to the same puzzle because of the depth of the powers and the freedom players have to create their own solutions. None of these solutions are actually unique to players. Thousands of people will have similar or identical solutions. But the flexibility of the shrines to accept several different answers is what creates the illusion that every solution is uniquely yours. The question is, how do you balance all possible solutions to have a similar level of difficulty? With complete player freedom based on the depth of player choice found in Tears of the Kingdom, you can't. If there were a hypothetical shrine like Trial of Power where you need to burn some leaves, but you can't find the hanging torch, you can solve this problem with ease by throwing a fire fruit at the ground, igniting the leaves. You can also use a fire sword, a fire arrow, a flamethrower boomerang, or a flame emitter shield. Throwing a fire fruit, of which you'll amass hundreds throughout your adventure, is easier and more convenient than finding the missing lantern within the confines of a puzzle. To balance solutions, to make the variable puzzle difficulty more equitable, there needs to be restrictions on what players can use or do. Otherwise, if any of the aforementioned components of puzzle design are unfulfilled, puzzles become unpuzzling. An unpuzzling puzzle is an experience that provides little to no satisfaction when you find a possible solution. When puzzles become tedious, boring, anticlimactic, or underdeveloped, they're unpuzzling. The antithesis, puzzling puzzles, don't always need the most complex, exhilarating, developed puzzles of all time. Puzzling puzzles only need to fulfill the purpose of their context. Are the puzzles supposed to be complex, long, and intertwining? Alternatively, are the puzzles supposed to be quick, short bursts before returning elsewhere? Tears of the Kingdom falls into the second category. Its puzzles are mostly contained to isolated chambers called shrines, which act as short bursts of puzzle solving before returning to the overworld. Breath of the Wild started the short burst approach that the next entry would follow, yet it was Nintendo's first attempt at creating open-world puzzles. There were bound to be frustrations, inequitable solutions, tedium, and lacking rewards. For the team's second attempt at shrines, they decided to fix almost none of that. Sometimes they made it even more tedious and frustrating than Breath of the Wild. To know how, we need to look at, and inside, every shrine. All 152. Inequitable solutions, tedium, and ill-suited puzzle progression are the three main problems that pervade the staggering 152 shrines of Tears of the Kingdom. As an improvement, Nintendo restricted access to features like portable Zonai devices and the auto-build rune in shrines. But, as we'll see, there still exists puzzles that require only using an item or two instead of ingenuity for puzzle solving. The removal of armor as a potential reward within shrines, compounded with the frequency of blessing shrines, creates a more taxing tedium than what was in the prior entry. To top it all off, I saved the worst problem for last, the one problem I thought Nintendo would rectify in their next Zelda game: ill-fitting puzzle progression. I've collected all my data on shrines using GameWith.net, a site that categorized their walkthrough shrine by shrine. Most of their screenshots and information utilizes the Japanese names for locations. While I tried to reference my copy of Tears of the Kingdom for the correct English names, some of them may not be fully accurate. On the spreadsheet, link in the description, you can find the name of the shrine, the optional rewards therein, its location, its puzzle type, if it's attached to a shrine quest or cave, as well as any additional comments I added to help me identify the central gimmick of each puzzle. The quality column was my way of deciding how effective each shrine was at achieving its intended goal, or what I can surmise. 5 out of 5 stars does not always mean the puzzle is perfectly complex or intricate. A 5 out of 5 shrine houses a complete, satisfying experience for its respective gimmick. For those watching instead of listening, I'll keep a counter on screen to track how many shrines I've discussed and how many remain. With it, you can ensure that we've talked about every last shrine. Our first 4 shrines are the tutorial ones: Uko, Inisa, Gutanbak, Nachoya. Each one grants Link a new ability, naturally meaning that the basic puzzles are introductions, tutorials to help acquaint players with their newfound powers. They each fulfill their purpose well and receive 5 out of 5 stars. Another commendable addition is the new type of shrine, Proving Grounds. Proving Grounds are trials that take away all of Link's current equipment, meaning that he must conquer the combat challenge using only the available resources, of which there are few. This category is an extension of a shrine quest challenge that appeared before in the Zelda series. Entering Eventide Island in Breath of the Wild triggered a shrine quest. The residing Sheikah monk would snatch all of Link's gear, tasking him with conquering the island and unlocking a reward by obtaining and placing 3 orbs in their pedestals, only with the materials that the island provided. Proving Grounds diversify themselves by usually implementing a unique gimmick. Some shrines in this category have traps or environmental hazards that can aid Link in dispatching the constructs. There are a total of 15 Proving Grounds, 13 of which have a unique gimmick to aid you in combat. One is an infiltration mission, 2 of them focus on drowning soldier constructs, another 2 are centered on Ultra Hand creations, one of which is about vehicles, the other of which is about autonomous killer robots. 3 Proving Grounds involve triggering Rube Goldberg-style traps to crush, electrocute, or incinerate your foes. 1 takes place in the pitch dark. There's a shrine with low gravity. You have 1 challenge focused on verticality and gaining high ground. A different Proving Grounds is filled with devices that make wonderful weapons when using recall on them. And Nintendo also added a Proving Ground shrine about things that spin. Yeah, that last one's the most underwhelming, but otherwise, entering this combat-focused type of shrine was always a treat. Each one encourages a different style of play, developed sufficiently over the course of about 5 minutes, the typical time I spent completing one. They're challenging, they're unique, they're not too long, they're not too short, they're not too hard, and they're not too easy. Sometimes. With that, it's time to start talking about ill-fitting progression and what that concept actually means. Challenges, like puzzles, become progressively more difficult in video games. That statement is the ideal and rarely, if ever, true. The reason that it's the ideal progression for people is based on the accruement of game knowledge. As you play, you become more familiar with the game, its controls, mechanics, combat, etc., meaning that you're more capable of tackling more difficult challenges. Similarly, think of when tutorials occur. Every tutorial I've seen appears right at the moment a new mechanic or control option is available and relevant, sometimes right before the mechanic or input is available. Tutorials illuminate the player on what is possible within the game world before or while a mechanic is useful. A tutorial that appears after the player is required or able to learn the mechanic is superfluous at best and annoying at worst. Breath of the Wild had 1 tutorial shrine, It taught all hidden combat mechanics that a player would need to know if they hadn't discovered them already. I expected Tears of the Kingdom to have another similar shrine. Maybe there would be 2 tutorial shrines, one for the mechanics that Nintendo carried over, and another for the new hidden combat mechanics like throwing materials. There are not 1, not 2, not 5, but 7 tutorial shrines. 7 tutorials, over half of which I did not discover until 50 hours in. After playing for 50 hours, the game decided I was finally ready for the grueling trial of learning how to throw a weapon, a mechanic that receives a pop-up message in the beginning of the game. This is an unfortunate symptom of tying tutorials to shrines, which can be experienced in any order even when there is a semblance of prescriptive tutorialization, because most of the tutorials appear on the suggested initial path to Hyrule Castle, and after that, Rito Village in the northwest. That doesn't excuse the existence of tutorial shrines in non-prescribed progression areas to the far east like the Dueling Peaks or Akala. Strangely, there are system messages that pop up during the tutorial section, the Great Sky Island, or when interacting with a new mechanic. These windows explain what the mechanic does and the basic use case for it. These basic pop-ups are more apt tutorials than every single tutorial shrine. I knew every mechanic taught in the 7 glorified lessons. How to use a bow, how to use a shield, flurry rush, throwing items, throwing weapons, how to use a bow, again, and how to sneak up on enemies. Before I left the Great Sky Island. Before you can ever encounter these 7 shrines. I'm sure these repeated tutorials point to useful mechanics for less vigilant players, but this whole video has been about how I, and maybe you, play Zelda games. So in my eyes, based on how I've played, Tears of the Kingdom only has 145 actual shrines. There is one other type of ill-fitting progression in shrines: combat difficulty. Out of the 15 proving grounds, there are 2 whose gimmick is difficulty, titled Beginner and Intermediate. There is no other mechanic, situation, or resource that differentiates these 2 from their peers. Besides, there's nothing stopping you from ignoring the beginner shrine until your combat skill is well beyond the skill floor required to complete this introductory encounter. Breath of the Wild had a similar problem, except far more frequent. I am at least grateful that only 2 combat shrines suffer from the problem of ill-fitted difficulty compared to the monotonous 20 from the previous game. On a related note, have you heard of fans? You know, the things that blow air out of them. Well, I heard from someone that if you gather enough and attach them to logs, you can make a motorboat. I know, that may sound outlandish, but this is a concept the players should know, since creating the makeshift motorboat I described is part of completing the Great Sky Island, the game's tutorial. Sorry for repeating myself, but if Tears of the Kingdom is insistent on repeating its tutorials and puzzles, there shouldn't be anything wrong with myself following suit. After understanding the basic mechanics of fans upon touching the surface of Hyrule, I found Ishodog's Shrine, whose gimmick was about creating vehicles with fans. I thought I already learned how fans are capable of moving buoyant materials like logs or wood across bodies of water, but I entertained the possibility that this Zonai device had more usefulness than I thought. First trial, I need to move forward, but there's an unclimbable wall which is too high to jump over. At least there's a but I've played Breath of the Wild. I know an upward-facing fan creates an updraft to lift Link higher with the paraglider. Trial 1 solved. Next task. Attach a fan to a plank, something that I already did on the Great Sky Island, except I actually had to connect logs. Meaning we have a simpler puzzle than what was available in the tutorial. Third trial. There's a platform attached to a rail, but there's nothing to push the platform up to the next floor. Alright, confession time. I've never been the best at science, especially physics. On top of that, my knowledge of physics ends at a high school level. Despite everything I just said, I already know the answer. Generate enough force using fans to counteract the gravitational force. I grab 2 nearby fans, attach them to the bottom of the platform, and activate the makeshift elevator. With this elevator puzzle being so easy, what other applications could these fans have? There must have been something else beyond this elevator, and there was. It was the terminal, the end of the shrine! All the utility about fans were concepts I already knew, whether from playing the previous popular entry, finishing the required tutorial area, or understanding rudimentary physics. I gained nothing new from this shrine. It was a waste of my time. Though there are only 7 explicit tutorial shrines, there are implicit tutorial shrines, following the same structure as Isho-Dag for other mechanics or Zonai devices. This category, since almost all of them revolve around Zonai devices, is labeled as device tutorials. They are basic, fundamental concepts that future puzzles, usually located in the same region, expand upon. Take the Hoverstones, for example, a Zonai device that, when activated, is suspended in air until Link's energy cell depletes. I encountered this device in the Sky Islands above Zora's domain. There, in the overworld, I learned the basics of how this device worked. I needed to reach a higher altitude, but the only way forward required crossing a large gap. I found some Hoverstones, activated one, and realized I could use this device to reach my destination high in the sky. Wait, I only had a few Hoverstones in my inventory. I needed a way to conserve my resources. Using only a few Hoverstones, I would attach them together, send them up into the sky, ascend through one, detach the remaining, and repeat this process. Not only did I discover through unguided exploration the basic use case for Hoverstones, but I also uncovered a technique to conserve my portable supply by chaining them together. Later on, I would return to the surface, diving down to Mifa Court, which attracted me because of the glowing green shrine nearby. I enter and see Hoverstones scattered about. That's odd. I thought I had already learned how to use this Zonai device. I won't repeat the same song and dance as before, even if Tears of the Kingdom is insistent on repeating its tutorials. I learned nothing substantial within this device tutorial. I jumped on Hoverstones to climb across gaps and reach areas blocked by unclimbable walls. I guess there was something technically new, a puzzle about transporting a ball across a gap, but there were not enough Hoverstones to cross the entire gap. I could have used the technique I learned before, moving the orb from platform to platform with Ultra Hand, yet I decided to follow the game's suggestions. There was a switch which, upon being hit, activated a pillar which thrust forward and retracted in quick succession, a force powerful enough to push a Hoverstone. I already knew that low-intensity forces like a single fan were not strong enough to move a Hoverstone, thanks to my pre-shrine adventuring. So attaching the orb to a Hoverstone, activating the device, placing it in front of the pillar, and hitting the switch was a solution I identified before I really took in the entire puzzle. I didn't even notice the chest behind me. In another shrine, Ijo-O, I could see the terminal off in the distance, but ice chunks blocked the path. I used a few fire fruits from my inventory to melt the ice. Similar problem in the next room, but a spew of flames prevented me from moving forward. I equip a random shield and easily move on to the next room. There, I see a pushover enemy holding a shield. I dispatch the construct and see 4 rockets laid in a rectangular formation, perfectly placed. Too perfect. I don't know why shields are now relevant to this shrine's gimmick since the previous 2 predicaments focused on dealing with flames. Whatever, I attach a rocket to my shield and soar above the steep wall, gliding toward the terminal. Now, how did Ijo-O Shrine relate to implicit tutorials like the previous examples? In every way, actually. When seeing the ice barrier, I already knew that I needed heat to melt it. When seeing the onslaught of flames, I already knew I needed a shield to block it. I used background knowledge and previously acquired tools to resolve the situation. I had already learned my lesson. Except I didn't, because Ijo-O is supposed to teach you about the versatility of fuse with shields. The association between icicles and needing to melt them happened so suddenly that I failed to notice the pile of shields and flame emitters nearby. I had blocked the breath of so many fire Lizalfos that I failed to notice a weak soldier construct carrying a shield fused to a block, capable of preventing damage. Even though I failed to learn the intended lesson, wasn't the knowledge of shield fusing new to me? Of course not. I used blunt shields to break ore veins, I had used dozens of rocket shields to trivialize trials of ascension, and fusing a flame emitter to a shield is one of the pre-fused equipment items I collected on the Great Sky Island. I was introduced to this mechanic during the beginning of the game. There were 2 choices. I could either ignore the intended teaching or learn a concept I already mastered. Every implicit tutorial shrine suffers from the same conundrum. They teach mechanics you have likely learned while exploring the open world. Ijo-O, Ihan-A, and Isho-Dag felt the most demeaning, but for every player, different shrines than the 3 previously discussed will be epistemologically fruitless. Jiru Tagumak informs the player about wings, a device introduced where else but the Great Sky Island. Seruta Bomak enlightens you on the uses of Ascend, repeating the same lesson learned in the Ascend tutorial, located on, you guessed it, the Great Sky Island. Taji Katz's lesson was on connecting logs together, a technique I used within the first few hours of my playthrough on... need I say where? Implicit tutorials do expand beyond the confines of mechanics introduced on the floating sky island which will not be named, but they appear later than when they are exigent. Mayao Mekis is a tutorial about gaining height using the bouncy sails of ancient flying Rito ships, which I encountered before entering this shrine. Igo Shon suffers the same fate, located in the east on the Sky Island path to the area's respective dungeon, after encountering the floating bubbles. Murok taught me that a spring can launch Link. Susuyai informed me about small wheels, devices I experimented with immediately after setting foot on the surface. Sina Kawak involved a lesson about how the balloon device acts like a hot air balloon. Maybe it was useful for some, but I made the connection after simply glancing at the Zonai device. Conquering Murakuguk required knowing how to use big wheels to transport connected parts, a technique I accidentally learned in my failed Zonai engineering courses. Mayatat is a safe-ish space to practice driving a sled across quicksand. How fortuitous, or tragic depending on your view, that I just finished a shrine about the same concept. To complete Apogek, I needed to construct a fan plane, the first blueprint I discovered in the depths. I already knew the construction process and utility of the vehicle long before finding this shrine. Only 4 implicit tutorials appeared at salient times. After finishing Kadaunar, I consciously knew how water or ingredients with water-infused properties interacted with lava. Rakashog's lesson helped me understand the combat and puzzle interactions possible with mirrors. Tsutsuum appeared at the perfect time for me, before I interacted with Zonai stakes, but not too long before I needed the device to accomplish something with them. Joju Uu enlightened me on the depths of the physics engine in Tears of the Kingdom. I discovered that individual pieces of bridges mattered. If I could think of a new physics interaction, it might just be possible. What's stopping these shrines from being repeated knowledge for other players, though? Only the Great Sky Island. After that, nothing. Every player's playthrough plays out differently. I started adventuring in Nekluda, but my childhood friends started in Hebra, a long-distance friend began their journey in Gerudo Desert, and another of my friends from high school went toward Lanayru. Knowledge that was enlightening to me was, almost certainly, redundant for someone else, and vice versa. When I claim that the shrines scattered throughout the world of Tears of the Kingdom have ill-fitting progression, I mean that the non-linear exploration of the world is at odds with the prescriptive conveyance of what should be unfamiliar mechanics. If puzzles are learning opportunities, how can it be a puzzle if the player already knows the answer, often before taking in the entire chamber? The most infamous type of shrine from Breath of the Wild remains. In my initial journey through Hyrule, I found a cluster of bombable rocks on the side of a cliff in the northwest. I used a bomb arrow to open the cavern, where a shrine rested inside. A pleasant surprise. I glided toward the shrine, activated it, and entered the elevator. I was hoping for, at least, a surprising puzzle. Not many puzzles were puzzling beforehand, so my expectations were tempered. The loading screen faded, enter Blessing Shrine, exit Excitement. I received a reward for accomplishing nothing. A spirit orb was worth nothing. Every shrine challenge I faced was equivalent to doing nothing. When the challenge of a shrine amounts to solely finding the location of it, what point is there? Why do other spirit orbs require a puzzle or several, or defeating a boss then? What would be the challenge? Movement itself cannot be the challenge, considering how much freedom Link has to glide anywhere without losing any significant height. If you can find a high place, any height loss is irrelevant, an issue compounded by the addition of islands high in the sky that offer dozens of warp points for immediate height gains. Stamina isn't a limiting factor either, especially because consuming several stamina potions during a long glide is commonplace, and the ingredients to make one are some of the most ubiquitous. Multiply each of these individual systems together, and any shrine that requires Link to reach the peak of somewhere is always, easily, at any time, accessible. Nintendo already had one attempt at open-world puzzle design with Breath of the Wild. So how many shrines are still worth nothing in their second attempt, Tears of the Kingdom? Well, there are 5 if I want to be generous and exclude Blessing Shrines where you have to accomplish the difficult task of walking through a cave. There's the Otutsum Shrine in the Gerudo Highlands, the Irasak Shrine in Gerudo Desert, the Joku-U Shrine at Dragonhead Island, the Taki-Ihaban Shrine below the Linder's Brow Skyview Tower, and the Kahatanaum Shrine on the Rising Island chain, located in Hebra. The Rising Island chain's Kahatanaum is a blessing shrine, sitting at the top of a Sky Island section that is part of a main quest. Kahatanaum is the first blessing shrine that sits there, patiently, waiting you to walk over and collect your reward. What kind of puzzle is that? The Taki-Ihaban Shrine requires gliding over a gap in a cave. Sure, there's a terrifying monster if you linger in the gap long enough, but I never encountered this monster myself. I glided to the shrine and conquered the daring challenge of being clueless. I stumbled into Joku-U Shrine while the area was covered in fog. Within a minute of arriving on the foggy Sky Island, I fell down a hole right next to the shrine, unknowingly bypassing the prescriptive journey associated with a different main quest, which at least explains why the shrine itself was so underwhelming. The fourth offender, Otutsum, has a lot in common with the next contestant for the worst shrine. In the Gerudo Highlands, the lower section, mind you, there was a shrine, not difficult to reach. I glided down to the open field with the shrine laid bare for anyone in any direction to see. What kind of shrine was it? A blessing, obviously. Of course there wouldn't be a puzzle in the shrine which desperately needed a puzzle to be interesting. Finally, we come to the shrine that broke me, Irasak. While talking with my friend about Tears of the Kingdom, because we have nothing better to do with our time, he mentioned that shrines of light always existed directly above any light route in the depths. I was incredulous and decided to test his claim when I returned home. I found almost all of the light routes in the Gerudo Desert depths. Most of the shrines lined up perfectly. It seemed my friend was correct. I also saw a light route with no corresponding shrine. I placed a beacon where the shrine would be on the surface. The closest fast travel point was the Lightning Temple, so I teleported there, used Ascend to exit, and surveyed my surroundings for a shrine. As soon as I turned towards the east, the green swirl of the shrine almost blinded me with how obvious it was. With this shrine being so close to the ground, so easily accessible, there must be a puzzle inside. I glided down, activated the shrine, and walked into the gate. Enter Blessing Shrine. Exit Curiosity. Enter Bewilderment. Here was a shrine with no obfuscation or navigational trick. I navigated to an unassuming shrine, a type which has always contained a puzzle, only to find a blessing. For what? What challenge did I overcome? I traversed here, blissfully unaware that I ignored the challenge. Where was my puzzle? Where was my boss? What challenge did I overcome? What cave did I navigate? What crystal did I deliver? I collected my Light of Blessing, but it felt so worthless. Why should I have completed challenges for the other 100 shrines when this one had no challenge, no difficulty, no problem to solve, no boss to defeat, no crystal to deliver, no quest to complete? Was it all arbitrary? The real kicker, the turning point which transformed my confusion to frustration, was when I decided to start another playthrough. Several, actually. I returned to the Irasak Shrine on foot. Clueless, I walked into the quicksand, which sapped my stamina for so much as walking. Not like that was much of a challenge with my 3 stamina wheels, though. After wading through quicksand, I climbed up a small rock and entered the shrine. Even if I didn't glide, even if I approached the shrine on the ground, even if I played by the game's rules, even if I followed the prescribed path, disappointment would greet me at the end of every path. I couldn't escape the feeling that I wasted my time completing shrines like Irasak, shrines which bestow a reward for doing nothing of substance. This was an existing problem from Breath of the Wild. But wouldn't a sequel ensure that all shrines are finally worthwhile? Sequels by their nature are successors, and they carry the burden of being more than what came before. Frequently, they provide an answer to this conundrum by adding more content, adding more depth, adding more stories, or adding more solutions to patch previous problems. Tears of the Kingdom added more content, but didn't resolve the problems from before. Instead, these 5 shrines repeat the same mistakes from the previous entry, a running theme for what we'll discuss next. Pause. Let's talk about those blessing shrines for a moment. There are a total of 51 blessing shrines. Rounding down, that is 33.55% of all shrines, if you include the tutorial shrines. For the purpose of discussion, the percentage is close enough to 33.33 repeating percent that functionally, 1 out of every 3 shrines is a blessing shrine. Let that sink in. 1 out of every 3 shrines is an empty formality to collect your reward. Often, the developers reserve a blessing shrine for when the player solves a puzzle within the open world, a fair compensation for the puzzling challenge that the player had already completed. Other times, the challenge is walking, swimming, or paragliding to the glowingly obvious shrine, as previously highlighted. Puzzles in the open world are trickier to design though. By integrating puzzles into the larger world, it becomes easier to introduce noise. There are a lot of shrine quests that hide the objective, carrying a crystal to the correct location behind vines, similar to what happened in the Trial of Power shrine we talked about. But the vines sprout from a sky island with an overgrowth of trees. An immediate glance at the sky island doesn't reveal anything suspiciously out of place, unlike the distracting presence of vines inside a technologically advanced shrine. Mayam, Taninud, Joshu, Okojishi, Natak, Kumamen, Ganos, Gikaku, and Jinodok are 9 shrines whose challenge exists in the open world. Find the crystal among the noise and return it to the shrine's entrance. Funnily enough, this type of shrine constitutes about 1/3 of the total shrines located in the sky, excluding the 4 tutorial shrines. 1/3 doesn't sound like a lot quantitatively. Qualitatively, I felt like every shrine among the Sky Islands was a sky crystal shrine, no matter where I went. Fighting a flux construct? Crystal. Launching myself through the sky? Boom. Crystal. Return to the surface to avoid the monotony? Crystals everywhere! Jonyu, Jochi Ihiga, Rakakudaj, Ikatak, Oogim, Toki, Ratafuum, Enoma, and Ishokin are the same activity as in the sky, but on the surface. There are a few cute interactions to differentiate, 2 of them. Ishokin's quest involves finding, taming, and bringing a massive horse that could be, theoretically, anywhere. The quest to open Jochi Ihiga requires haggling a Hylian grifter, which lasts for about a minute before returning to the same vehicle building of the others. That should be all of them, right? Wrong. Momosik, Usazum, Sisuran, and Sakunbomar repeat and repeat. They repeat the formula for creating a crystal escort mission, and they repeat the bosses from Breath of the Wild. Enemies I have defeated to the point that the only thing they fear is me. In total, 22 blessing shrines involve a strikingly similar activity, featuring little variation. 22 hazily similar experiences. Tedium is how I would describe this pervasive problem. Homogeneous challenges are the norm for not only blessings, but all shrines within Hyrule. Including a blessing shrine at the end of a cave or well is commonplace, so much that I would have preferred an actual shrine because the only challenge in locating one within a cave is finding it. But you will find it, eventually. Caves, barring one notable exception that doesn't even house a shrine, are linear single-line affairs. A blessing shrine as a reward for walking is a waste of my time, if I were actively searching, except I never was. I would accidentally find a shrine, and since I'm already here, I might as well peek at what's inside. The puzzle could potentially be worth— never mind, it's just a blessing. Well, since I'm here already, I might as well collect my reward instead of leaving. But there can't be that many, right? Geotak, Mahahisik, Minatak, Tenmaten, Susub, Maoikes, Yomizuk, Jogou, and Bamitok. 9 indistinguishable rewards by pure chance. What exacerbates the tedium of completing shrines, but probably eased the struggle of creating content for a game as monolithic as Tears of the Kingdom, is the grouping of shrines with identical, maybe modified, activities throughout the map. Each previous grouping of shrines was its own category, but there are still more for the few blessings that remain. Igashuk, Motsusis, and Mayotaki are a part of the Acorn category, where you follow acorns for your reward. Riveting, I know. Siha Jog belongs to another trio of trials about skydiving within a time limit. The other 2 concluded with a proving grounds and a shrine, but both had something, anything after skydiving. This one doesn't, like missing the final part of a trilogy. The shrine quest category constitutes Kurakat, Pupunke, Ninjis, Jochishiu, and Uchojis. They are, besides two, errands. Delivering a Korok's groceries, throwing a single spear, and skydiving to a noticeable, obvious shrine are 3 errands which I should have left on the to-do list. The exceptions are riddles, usually simple but also clever. Wordplay and small environmental cues help guide players to interpreting the riddle correctly. I can't help but feel, though, there was another open-world Zelda game which had riddles like these, with more of them, featuring a bard whom I miss dearly. The final 5 blessing shrines are what I would consider the ideal. Their trials exist in the overworld, but they are substantial and involved enough to warrant a reward as the only thing necessary inside a Shrine of Light. Accessing Mayasyar and Ga-Ahisas requires thoroughly exploring a larger sky island, solving puzzles with mirrors to proceed toward the Light of Blessing at the end of the tunnel. Marari Inn and Suariwak have tie-in quests which expand upon previous stories from Breath of the Wild. Marari Inn's quest involves slaying pirates and plundering their hidden treasure, that being the island's new shrine. The journey to Suariwak is involved, requiring that you visit and clear out 3 different Yiga camps before undergoing the Yiga Blademaster exam, which, when passed, grants access to the Light of Blessing. How funny that the 2 shrines which expand upon the world building of an old enemy clan and a creatively repurposed island are satisfying. If I didn't know any better, I would have called these shrines a sequel to their Sheikah counterparts. The existence of Chichim Shrine makes me wish every cave behaved similarly. Wandering Gerudo Desert with a severe sandstorm swirling around, I stumbled into a sinkhole, falling through. I assumed, like other games, that I would lose health and respawn. Instead, I discover a new cave, a prison ground swarming with Gibdo. Among falling rubble, a few newly slain Gibdo, and sliding through tiny cracks, I found a blessing shrine. Enter Relief. The reward for what I experienced wasn't underwhelming or disappointing, but satisfying and fitting. Maybe the only reason I remember Chichim fondly is because it was the exception. Looking through the shrine catalog in Tears of the Kingdom, there are 29 that I would consider puzzling. Like the previous categories, there is an obvious formula for the puzzling experiences, but that shouldn't diminish their value. It eases the already tremendous developer workload, and as long as the result is puzzling, does the existence of a formula matter? Most puzzling Shrines of Light have 2 involved or 3 less involved trials that all expand upon gimmicks introduced at the entrance. There is not always noise, but the most puzzling shrines introduce as much noise as possible within the confines of using identical interiors. The most enjoyable ones frequently allow players to use multiple, equitable solutions to conquer the trials ahead and reach the terminal. Tukarok is an exemplar for the perplexing, satisfying potential of puzzles. Entering the shrine, I notice a gate on my left, behind which is the terminal. There's also a Zonai orb-sized cavity. After running forward and falling down a smooth, unclimbable wall, I find the necessary orb. But I can't reach it using Ultra Hand from above, nor can I push the orb onto the area I came from. I have to find another way around. I turn left, see a pre-built vehicle, and know what I have to do. I ride the car across the lava and reach the next conundrum, another ladder. I need to bring the orb with me, but I also need a vehicle to escort the ball onto the same level as Link. An easy, probably intended solution is to attach slabs to a big wheel, connecting the orb to your creation, placing it on the conveniently ball-shaped rail, and activating the device. The slabs will rotate with the wheel, creating an impromptu paddle, bringing the ball right where I need. I couldn't comprehend how to make that paddling device I described, so I got creative. I placed the ball near the rail's end, holding it in place for a few seconds. Deactivating Ultra Hand, I climbed the ladder and activated Recall. Although the ball slid down the rail while I was climbing, rewinding its movement would place it at a level that I could reach with Ultra Hand. As the orb reaches the height of its rewound momentum, I reactivate Ultra Hand, grabbing the orb and transporting it to the next trial. The final trial expands on the paddling principle I was supposed to learn. Now, there's a raft to cross a gap of water. Perfect. I can place my orb friend on the raft and float to the other side. But the way forward is against the current. There are no fans nearby to counteract the current's force, and I had concluded that attempting to launch the orb with bombs would almost certainly kill me. There were, however, spare scraps of wood, such a size that they perfectly fit on 2 big wheels. In spite of not learning my lesson the first time, I had a revelation that set me on the right path. I attached the boards to 2 big wheels, gluing those to the 2 sides of my raft. I placed my creation in the water with my friend on top. The ride was bumpy, to say the least, but despite making an abomination that would get me fired from any engineering job, I made it across, placed the orb on its rightful place, and finished the shrine. Within TotK, there were 3 distinct trials: crossing the lava, paddling the orb to a higher elevation, and making a paddle boat. Every puzzle uses big wheels as the central gimmick, but there is an evolution in complexity, requiring more knowledge about using this Zonai device to paddle objects for each subsequent task. There's the classic butt of puzzle design, always nice to see, but the noise for this set of puzzles is subtle. The introductory section uses big wheels as a tire, pushing a vehicle forward like a car. Under the surface level use of the device, the real reason the pre-built creation acts like a car is because Nintendo borrowed real-life physics principles of tires and wheels. The device's motor forces the tires to rotate around its axle, reducing friction and pushing anything it's attached to forward when against the ground. Because the tire rotates around the axle when active, big wheels also function as a perpetually spinning shaft. They can be the basis for a car, a merry-go-round, or a paddle. Disguising the wheels as only a car part hides the signal to this puzzle, the idea that wheels can act as the motor for a paddle. In terms of optional creative solutions, TotK doesn't allow for cheap solutions with not ubiquitous applications. Instead, creative solutions require intuitive problem solving. The trick I used for the second trial, combining Recall and Ultra Hand to move an object to a higher level, can actually transport the orb from its origin point up to the cavity at the start. In exchange for completing the shrine swiftly, this specific solution requires creative thinking about how Link's abilities multiply to create something unique. It doesn't hurt that executing the outlined solution is funny too. Geocomb is potentially infamous for its difficulty, but I think that's due to increased implementation of noise compared to the average puzzle. Like TotK, the noise is not environmental, but physical. The first puzzle utilizes metal slabs as a method to balance on 2 metal rails, which tricked me into not considering the fact that they can be balancers to guide another slab across a rail's winding path. Coincidentally, though it's not really because I planned everything, this puzzle also forced me to get creative. Instead of making a device, I used a device I had on my person, a shield. Balancing on the thin rails before executing a shield jump, I surfed a small distance before returning to a standing position upon losing momentum. Carefully repeat this process and you too can reach the terminal like I did. Shield surfing across a thin railing is an equitable solution, because it's not based on resources. Rather, equitable solutions are ingenious and usually funny. Mayanas tenbes mogisari se papa maksure, dioshin runakit sahiro, taoyosipun, timawak, mayak, turakamik, sorio tanog, ryogok, mayaoshi, gasas, tadarok, utsushok, mayamats, rotsumamu, kudanisar, kyu-yo-yo, and kitawak fell into this category for their trial intensity or amount. They build on previous concepts in sets of 2 or 3, and they are all mechanically distinct. I refuse to become Sisyphus, so I won't repeat the same exercise I already have for each shrine here. They're all solid. The next subcategory, however, is fairly distinct. Kyokugon is one of the only new puzzles whose noise lies in its environment. The way toward the terminal is blocked by a gate. There are about a dozen potential cavities to place orbs, but there are only 4 orbs. Guessing the combination is unlikely, so the problem becomes figuring out the pattern between the correct and incorrect cavities. The answer is above you, the mundane ceiling pattern located in every non-blessing shrine. Keen-eyed players will notice that, unlike the other ceilings, the glowing circle patterns are above certain orb cavities, denoting them as the correct placements for the available Zonai balls. Orochium, Jonsao, and Karahatag fell into this category for their use of noise through the subversion of mechanical and puzzle-solving assumptions. Orochium's noise lies in its name, Courage to Fall. I read the name, immediately ran into a laser, and fell into the void. After taking damage, I formed the assumption that lasers were dangerous, an assumption I had to break to fall through the floor and ascend through a different floor to obtain a key. Jonsao introduces buoyant building materials. When submerged in water, they resurface with enough force to be airborne momentarily. I assumed that the buoyant force would be the same no matter how I immersed each part in water. I guess that stumped me on merely the second puzzle. Karahatag is a trial-intensive shrine, but its noise is more noteworthy. For the second trial, opening the gate forward requires lighting 3 torches at the same time, but walls surround the switch, which lowers the torches from their ceiling pillars, preventing players from fusing 3 of their dozens of fire fruit to an arrow and firing them to proceed forward. I assumed that I needed the spare lit torch to my right to light each individual torch when they descended. In actuality, you can use the lit torch as a weight to light the now accessible torches. Tears of the Kingdom uses assumptions to create noise, as opposed to older titles whose environment created noise. Subverting assumptions is what helps players find the signal. This compromise is what allows for the creators to repeat visual designs while maintaining puzzling trials. Of course, the only reason that this category exists in the first place is because using assumptions as noise is not the norm. And the same goes for every other aspect that makes these shrines puzzling. If I'm generous and don't include the 7 fake shrines, this category amounts to exactly 20% of shrines. A 20% success rate doesn't exactly inspire confidence in any field, puzzle design included. Let me be more fair and include the other shrines I've considered satisfying, aka 3 stars or above. I enjoyed 69 shrines, 47.59% when removing the tutorials, and a dismal 45.39% when including all 152. Neither percentage is surprising though. Creating 152 unique, puzzling shrines is, in my opinion, impossible, even on an individual's subjective level of enjoyment, like I've documented for myself with the 5-star ratings. But 45%? Would a 50% success rate be fine? Would 60% convince me the Shrines of Light were worth discovering and completing? I'm not sure, but what I am sure of is that the current 45% chance at satisfaction is not close enough to being an overall experience worth chasing. On the other hand are the stinkers, the most unpuzzling Shrines of Light, the ones that make me question why I ever wanted to engage with them in the first place. Only 26 have the dreaded fate of ending up here. There are 2 kinds of experiences for this category: a tried and true game that exists in the real world, or an underdeveloped idea. Both are emblematic of a word which summarizes this game's puzzle-solving experiences in its totality: potential. There is a potential game with short bursts of puzzling trials. There is a potentially puzzling shrine with similar mechanics to every trial found here. The only thing to call this situation, where a series of great puzzles will never fully exist, is unfortunate. The first subcategory replicates games found in real life, implemented using the physics of Tears of the Kingdom. Maya-Chin replicates pinball, Kamatukis copies golf, Jochi-EU is just Jenga, Zanmik mimics a prize scooper, and Oshozanu is a strength test. They are all simple affairs that, due to existing in the real world, are experiences I've already had. I know what a strength test is, I know how to play pinball, and how to play golf, and how to scoop a prize out, and how to play Jenga. What I don't know is why these games, with which people are likely familiar, are short, sometimes singular trials. A superficial game of Jenga or golf is all it takes to collect a light of blessing, I guess. The next classification houses the shrines which are underdeveloped, featuring too few ideas to be puzzling. Keep in mind, for all puzzles here, there is no noise to obscure the solution. Immediately after entering, I knew what I needed to do and how to do it. The hard part, or rather the monotonous part, was executing my solutions. Fittingly first, Aneda Mimik, Gata Nasis, Gemimik, Sibajitak, and Kisi no Na have a single trial. Little to no noise for a lone puzzle is the same thing I call going to the grocery store, or cleaning my room, or doing my laundry. The solution to a chore is always obvious, only the execution takes time. Jikais actually has 3 trials, but they all involve ascending through basic slabs. Maybe someone didn't learn their lesson from the Great Sky Island, but it didn't bear repeating for myself. Rossiwalk has 2 basic trials about buoyant balls, long after I understood the concepts from an earlier shrine. Sonapan has 2 simple ascend sections. Domizuin has an initially complicated shrine mechanic, finding the correct rotation to ascend through a giant rat cage of sorts. Still, it doesn't require many steps to solve, so a single trial is, nevertheless, underwhelming. Mogawak houses 2 trials about channeling electricity. There are 2 ascend trials in Turakawak. Musano Kier has 3 trials, but the first is an introduction to the ball and chain mechanic, hardly being a puzzle in and of itself. Siwakama barely has 3 trials, and they suffer a similar problem that will pop up later. Shrines about movement are inherently less complex. Kikakin is a single, long trial, but a puzzling challenge needs complexity, not longevity. Sikuku has 2 simple gear recalling puzzles. You know, like what I did on the Great Sky Island. Sitsum has 2 trials about what steering sticks can do. That information would have been potentially helpful closer to Central Hyrule, where I began my journey, not on the outer rim of the kingdom. Ekochiu has 3 simplistic recall puzzles. They aren't basic enough to be tutorials, but I also feel generous calling them puzzles. Ren-Is includes 2 puzzles I passed perfectly because I remember elementary physics. Gatakis involves skydiving through 2 trials. I hate to be the bearer of news far later than it's exigent, but this shrine sure doesn't. Oromuwak consists of 2 rocket-based challenges far too basic to be a puzzling time. There are only 3 shrines left to discuss. Why were they left for last? What is this mysterious final category reserved for only 3 whole shrines? It's the I don't know category. Actually, it's the I'm angry yet amused, so I guess it's alright, but is it really category? April Fool's jokes are funny when they're harmless pranks, all the more unexpected when it's May. I entered my 50-second blessing shrine when I noticed something unnatural. A bow laid against a torch to my right. The title card fades in and out. Unlit blessing. I chuckle. The punchline came before the setup, but I found a false blessing shrine. I follow along, laughing with Nintendo even though the joke is dead on arrival. Uh-oh, the terminal moved. Whatever will I do now? Do I wish there were an actual shrine instead? Yes. Is it also funny? Sure, in a cute way. In the future, I hope Nintendo can restrain themselves and save the punchline for after the setup. Wow Os is an inoffensive shrine. Inside, there are a few simple puzzles using basic physics principles. Outside, there's a quest attached to this shrine, one about finding a white bird among the snow which points to a cave, housing said shrine. Now, am I talking about Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild? Both, actually. Quests in Tears of the Kingdom do not confront the burden of being a sequel as talked about previously. They are not more than what came before, only a reflection of it. Think of the Zelda team's creative process for creating a sequel as recreating a mirror's reflection. Try capturing the most relevant details without using the exact ingredients that created the mirror's image in the first place. The White Bird Shrine quest in both entries is one result of the larger phenomenon of recreating Breath of the Wild's reflection. The last I'm angry yet amused, so I guess it's alright, but is it really talking point isn't just a shrine, but a system. There is one way that this entry attempts to be a sequel. After giving players unlimited freedom in the Sheikah Shrines, the Shrines of Light limit what players can use to conquer them. If a sequel is a successor, the puzzles in this recent Zelda entry actually commit to that burden, learning from past mistakes by adding restrictions to accessible tools and materials. Link can't crack open a few capsules to craft anything he wants with his abundant supply of Zonai devices. Nor can he use autobuild to recreate a shrine-completing beast of a machine with spare Zonite. Without the current restrictions, you could build devices which trivialize every puzzle, especially because almost all of them involve crossing a major gap or height, but with limited resources. As a hypothetical example, I always kept a frequently stocked supply of rockets. Reason being that they provided quick, simple height gain when attached to a vehicle or shield. Absolute freedom would permit me to take out as many rockets as I want and attach them to all my shields, giving me infinite potential height gain to reach the peak of a perfectly smooth wall or paraglide across a wide gap. If this technique were in the final game, it would certainly be funny, soundly trouncing all the hard-working game design poured into a puzzle in favor of lighthearted fun. But it would circumvent a vast majority of puzzles, reducing the value of a Light of Blessing to almost nothing, similar to the Irasak Shrine. If obtaining one costs only a rocket and a few seconds of time, what extrinsic reason do I have not to use that rocket shield as the one-size-fits-all solution to every predicament? If you're watching instead of listening, the bubble has already bursted. But for everyone else, this is no hypothetical. There is no extrinsic incentive not to use a rocket shield to reach the terminal. Only a handful of puzzles within shrines cannot be solved using this bubble-bursting method, one of those being the last shrine, Iunorok. Inside this and many other locations, there are switches which require a sizable amount of force to activate. You can use the tools within the confines of the puzzle to generate that force. Or you can use a bomb. Why not use a bomb? They're cheap and so accessible that, extrinsically speaking, there's no reason not to use them. While you can't attach rockets to your shield within the shrine like in the hypothetical scenario, it only requires diligence to leave a shrine and craft a rocket shield or stockpile while exploring Hyrule. Alternatively, spawning bomb flowers is permitted. Throw one to activate a switch or fuse one to a shield, creating a weaker, more horizontal force, but ultimately sending the player in the same desired direction, higher and farther. The ubiquitous utility of rocket shields and bomb flowers is representative of the first of three principal problems with puzzle design in Tears of the Kingdom: inequitable solutions. While not every puzzle solution in a multiplicative physics system can be equally balanced, they can be equitable, potentially by forbidding certain solutions or allowing ones that spark joy in players. Both answers are approaches that Nintendo implemented, but the resource richness of Hyrule counteracts the banishment of Zonai devices and auto-build within shrines. Time to take a page out of Nintendo's playbook and repeat something I told you near the beginning. I play Zelda games to be puzzled. I actively yearn to solve each entry's puzzles. I would warn against following in my footsteps, but it should come as no surprise that I completed all 145 shrines, plus the 7 fake ones. Solving each along with adventuring at my leisure clocked in at about 120 hours of playtime, which was enough to amass a steady supply of 100 plus bombs and 50 plus rockets at all times. Without trying, I gained more of these resources than I could expend, so much so that I actively tested new use cases for each item, hence how I discovered the comedic but disheartening versatility of bomb flower and rocket shields. Allowing easy crafting of puzzle-solving tools with hundreds of materials collected outside of a puzzle room's confines means that Lights of Blessing are not equitably earned. I feel damned if I do use the easy way out, and cheated if I don't. The reason behind the universal efficacy of bomb flower and rocket shields relates to the second problem I mentioned: tedium. The goal of most shrines is reaching the terminal through crossing a large gap, horizontal or vertical, not including what the same goal is applied to the open world for blessing shrines. The rare exceptions involve escorting an orb to its rightful resting place and/or activating a locked gate. Complete enough shrines and boredom becomes your best friend. When not encountering the first two problems, you're sure to find combat encounters and tutorials, both explicit and implicit, which are no longer relevant as something informative or challenging. These three issues are not new either. They existed in Breath of the Wild. A sequel, like a successor, should learn from the past, fix those mistakes, and grow into something more. What exists now is a reflection of the past puzzles, a flawed recreation of their design, not a sequel that expands and builds upon the old foundation. In the sky, I peered out from a hole inside a floating, perpetually spinning globe, seeing something weirder, if you'll believe it, than the structure I was inside. An intricate water system that stretched higher into the sky than I thought was possible. At its zenith, concentrations of gloop, technical term, were shot into the air, diving back down to the surface below, being the home of the Zora, a race of aquatic humanoids who needed water to survive and breathe. The goop behaved like oil in water, suffocating any Zora who were stuck. I channeled my inner hero and resolved to find the source of the Zora's problems. I cobbled together a makeshift aircraft, flew to a low-hanging platform, and traveled up through the chain of sky islands, finally reaching the entrance to the Water Temple, an entire dungeon that I discovered on my own through my own curiosity. I think it's one of my video game fantasies to discover an entire dungeon or temple on my own, with secrets and puzzles and unique enemies, no holding punches or railroading or guidance. Tears of the Kingdom gave me what I had always dreamt of. Previous Zelda games like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask have a notorious reputation for difficult, puzzling water temples. As a Zelda enthusiast, I was anticipating the possible complex puzzles that could occur, especially now that the rest of the game's puzzles are physics-based. Would Link have to create a device that directed the water flow? Would I need to recall platforms that fell down a waterfall? Would there be a mechanic that switches the dungeon's gravity intensity between normal and light, forcing me to plan out which setting I needed for the journey ahead? I found the main terminal, which would activate the dungeon, allowing me to complete its puzzles and touch the remaining terminals in order to open a door and fight the boss. I sprint toward the main terminal, touch the device, and begin exploring the dungeon of my dreams. If only I could say that were true. What really happened was that the main terminal rejected me, denied me access to the dungeon and its spoils. Why couldn't I access the dungeon? What was I missing? In a game that is a paragon of player freedom and choice, a game that gave me every ability that I needed to solve every potential puzzle, why couldn't I access the water temple? Furthermore, why could I solve every puzzle here, yet not activate any of the remaining terminals? The problem was conformity. I did not conform to the prescribed path of the main quest. I was like an actor being scolded by the director for not knowing the lines to a script I had never seen. At least I knew I was on the right track whenever the director let the scene continue. It may have taken me a few attempts, but I eventually could continue the scene after I found the designated area next to a designated shrine that taught me mechanics I already knew, which had the script I needed to follow. Interior, East Lanayru, pristine sanctum, night. King Dorephan lays, exhausted, across a Zoran shrine. Goop, technical term, covers him. He is visibly hurt and aching. A faint smile is painted across his face from the arrival of a close companion, Link. Link! It is so good to see you, my friend. I'm sorry to say we Zora need your help yet again. Have you seen my son, Sidon? You have? That's fantastic! Now I don't have to send you on a wild goose chase to find him, only to return to me for the key item you need. Speaking of, here are my scales. You'll need 5 of them. Link, have you heard of the Floating Scales Island? You have. Did you find the teardrop formed from stationary fragments? Wow, you're finding out a lot more than you should at this point of the story. You haven't gone up to the water tent. Oh, well that's a little awkward. You should really explore less next time. Unbeknownst to me, I was fighting against the script every step of the way. I didn't mean to, I wasn't intentionally antagonistic. I wanted to play by the game's purported rules, explore anywhere, create an adventure of my own, and craft my own way forward in this new Hyrule. Every time I tried creating a path forward, I was told no. I tried accessing a dungeon and the terminal said no. I tried talking with characters in a sequence that was, without my knowledge, out of order, and the characters themselves shouted at me, no. Go here, talk to this character, they will tell you to find the king, who you found already, who will tell you to go to the floating island you found already, where you will enter a new cave. Why a new cave? So that you can reach the unreachable sky islands you already reached. Why go through the sky islands? So that you can find the hidden dungeon you already found. I was tired of the yelling and the commanding. I thought I was playing an open-world video game. Where did my freedom go? Where did the wonderment go? Where did my open-ended dungeon go? Riding the elevator of a Skyview tower, I soared into the sky. Excited at what new islands I could find, my eyes steered south, gazing at a thundercloud formation. I didn't remember thunderstorms being that common in Faron, the southernmost region of Hyrule. Maybe this could be an anomaly I needed to investigate. I pulled out my paraglider and soared into the thunderhead. When entering the cloud formation, thunder struck, my vision blurred, and lightning was charging up, preparing to strike my metal equipment. I removed all my metal gear and landed on solid ground. I chucked a bright bloom seed at the floor, hoping it would illuminate my path. All it accomplished was creating brighter fog. Wonderful. I fumbled forward, eventually falling into a pit. A pit with a shrine, some semblance of safety. After activating the shrine, I turned around, discovering a unique door. A door identical to one at the beginning of the game, which drained my hearts as a test of endurance. The door taunted me. Did I really have enough hearts? Was I really strong enough to bear witness to the glorious treasure on the other side? Of course I was. I had plenty of heart containers, well over enough to open the door. Inside the chamber lay a single mask, crafted out of the same material as other Zonai creations. What was so valuable about this mask? Why was this my reward? I approached the foreign object, examined it, and nothing happened. A voice pierced through the silence. A voice which called to me, requesting that I follow the beam of light to its destination and escort the mask to its rightful place. A quest indicator appeared, denoting this activity as part of the main quest. What? I discovered this secret, shrouded island by my own choice, yet it was part of the main quest, which is usually some of the most rigid, prescriptive content in the game. Color me surprised when I find this quest. What could it even lead to that would denote this activity as part of the main quest? It was most likely something small. There are a plethora of other shorter main quests that focus on dialogue interactions and a potential cutscene once every fortnight. I follow the beam of light, place the artifact in its designated slot, all to discover that my real task is to deliver the remaining body parts to create a new, unique construct. Delivering each of the 4 robotic ligaments required solving in-depth puzzles in short bursts with plenty of flexibility and complex physics-based wizardry, featuring some of my own unconventional solutions. I could choose which puzzles to complete first, second, third, and fourth. Puzzles were even open-ended and puzzling since they existed within the open world, containing both signal and noise to boot. I never realized in the moment, but what I discovered was a dungeon. A proper, open-ended, complicated dungeon. This is what open-ended puzzle design was leading toward. If this same level of complexity existed in the other dungeons, multiplicative, puzzling dungeons would be a blissful future for this series. The dungeon I entered was the Construct Factory underground, though most refer to it as the Spirit Temple, since completing the dungeon awakens the Sage of Spirit. It was the second of 5 total dungeons I completed. There were 3 potentially incredible dungeons that awaited me afterward. It pains me to report that they will remain hypotheticals. 4 of the 5 dungeons shared the same structure as the Water Temple, a prescriptive experience with basic puzzles and underwhelming non-interactive stories. Only 1 of 5 dungeons in an open world embraces multiplicative puzzle design in an engaging manner. There's an uncomfortable tension between the divergent dungeon approaches, between liberating dungeons like the Construct Factory and prescriptive dungeons like the Fire, Water, Wind, and Lightning Temples. What liberating dungeons offer, and this may be too technical of a term for some, are awesome adventures, also known as AAs. AAs are what fuel immersive sims, Tears of the Kingdom included. Think back to my story about discovering and fighting a dragon in Breath of the Wild. That was one form of a AA, but why? AAs have loose definitions. All they need to be are adventures that are awesome, that engender some form of awe. You can experience awe in the same way a child does, where anything adrenaline or serotonin inducing is automatically awesome. Alternatively, you could experience awe in the beauty of a landscape, a character, etc. You could be in awe of mechanical complexity. You could feel awe because of something's scale. Awe is not a prescriptive feeling, it's flexible. AAs are the reason I love The Legend of Zelda. AAs are what power this series. What previous entries have leveraged is their ability to include AAs. Dungeons have historically acted as an energy-rich source for creating AAs because, in a linear game, prescriptive experiences are expected and natural. In a liberating game, prescriptive experiences are restrictive and suffocating. They are contrary to the game's conceit, unable to become energizing AAs. For some, the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom were AAs, and I won't argue against that. There can be awe in the dungeons, but I've experienced more profound awe from other series and most other Zelda games. In the absence of AAs, it seemed, to me, that Zelda was running on fumes. Its batteries were empty. Thankfully, I had already bought some AAs. After plugging them in, the power was back on. I thought there would never be the freedom to discover a dungeon on my own, and yet, there was a dungeon in the depths. I did find it on my own, and it was awesome. I never thought that I would take a long trek across Hyrule with the existence of fast travel, and yet, there was a quest about transporting supplies. I did trek there with my own makeshift vehicle, and it was awesome. I never thought that this familiar world could fill me with dread again, and yet, there was a giant frog that scared me. I did run away screaming, and it was awesome. These 3 stories were my AAs, the things that energized me to keep enjoying and appreciating the adventures I had in Hyrule. Nintendo used to be a toy company before making video games. Ultra Hand was one of their toys, though most people now know it as the name for one of Link's abilities. It was a simple but successful toy that let you grab objects at a distance. There were no batteries in this toy, you had to put in effort gripping the toy like a pair of scissors. Tears of the Kingdom fittingly borrows the device's name, but also its spirit. You are the batteries that power the experience. You have to put in effort to have fun and craft your own individual story. You have to make your own AAs. A multitude of games ship with batteries included, because most other video games are more prescriptive, to varying degrees, than Zelda. Finding the AAs when they're not included is the most difficult but rewarding part. There really should be a warning on the box next time though, so more players know to be active in their story making. Something like, batteries not included. The phrase would never catch on, I know, but I'm willing to workshop it.
Oh, Link. I'm home.
Adventure and discovery have always been the foundation of Zelda, but exciting combat, interesting characters, and engaging appropriate puzzles are all its central pillars. They always have been for every entry beforehand, and it seems like they still are for the eerily familiar future of the series. There is, however, not enough attention given to each individual pillar, and, in my opinion, this predicament is the dividing line between those who love the new direction for Zelda and those who hate the new direction for Zelda. If you care more about the central pillars instead of the foundation below them, Tears of the Kingdom is most likely disappointing. Its characters are underwhelming, not contributing toward the overall theme about the power of reconnecting with the past and those around you to accomplish something greater. The puzzles are not appropriate for their specified contexts. Instanced puzzles within shrines are either too basic or not developed enough, and the dungeons do not leverage their open nature to create engaging, puzzling adventures. The combat, maybe most disappointing of all, continues in the footsteps of the former Zelda formula, by only having small iterations on melee combat that don't create enough additional depth. If you care more about the foundation of adventure and discovery, no matter what pillars exist on top of it, Tears of the Kingdom offers a unique kind of adventure that no other game could create, provided you're willing to create AAs of your own, not the ones prescribed by the non-interactive stories. Player freedom is the most important aspect of this journey, and the new powers allow everyone to express their creativity through multiplicative gameplay, ensuring no 2 players have the exact same experience. Now, I have a question to leave you with. Was Tears of the Kingdom disappointing for you? If it was, do you care more about the pillars of Zelda? If not, do you care more about the foundation of the series, exploration and adventure? There is a connection between the two, but if you are paying attention, you know that binary answers are rarely true. Like how I'm ambitrinsic, I care about the pillars and the foundation. So for me, Tears of the Kingdom was disappointing, an underwhelming, sometimes worse retread of what came before. But ultimately, that's okay. Because the foundation, the ability to express myself throughout an epic journey, to make my own awesome adventures, is what makes me still say, oh, that's a good Zelda game. What I'll never say though is, oh, that's a good sequel. After all this time of playing and ruminating about Tears of the Kingdom, I keep questioning its initial pitch as a sequel to Breath of the Wild, a continuation to Breath of the Wild, an expansion to Breath of the Wild. In reality, it's a repetition of Breath of the Wild. The game is only a sequel in the way that The Wind Waker is a sequel to Ocarina of Time. Make small changes while recreating a reflection of the genre-defining entry. Breath of the Wild may have helped this series expand into uncharted territory, but Nintendo has reverted to its old habits, replicating what came before with few changes to the overall combat approaches, story structure, characters, puzzle complexity, unbalanced combat scaling, and prescriptive quest design. The reason it's more noticeable now is the setting. It's the same Hyrule with the same characters featuring the same villain where you play as the same Link, fighting the same enemies, using the same combat techniques, exploring the same geography, and uncovering the same history. Before Tears of the Kingdom came out, I would often dream about it, about what could happen in an expanded Hyrule. The dreams, though containing unrealistic expectations, always felt so familiar. I once had a dream about entering a new type of shrine, only to discover it was exactly like the old Sheikah shrines. I dreamt of what new enemies would be hiding in secret, only to find the demon from Princess Mononoke. I envisioned a complex history of Ganondorf's past, only to see the same mural in my dreams repeated ad infinitum. Playing Tears of the Kingdom was, in a way, a dream for me. It felt familiar, it felt safe, it felt unambitious. How can a sequel be familiar when it's supposed to be an expansion to what came before? Something that evolves. It can't, because Tears of the Kingdom isn't a sequel. It's a mimicry of Breath of the Wild, and a shallow one at that. Thank you so much for watching. Since you're here already, make sure to like, share, and, dare I say, subscribe? To make more videos like this in a timely manner, I would need donations from people like you as an excuse to run away from the entrapment of a day job, which consumes most of my time. I currently have a Ko-fi shown on screen and linked in the description. Please only donate if you are in a financially stable position. I'm still able to live, eat, sleep, and be hygienic without your donation. The Ko-fi is only if you would like me to spend more of my time focusing on YouTube videos instead of other jobs. Ko-fi is a one-time donation, so no subscription required. I've considered making a Patreon if there's enough support for that. A Patreon, since it's monthly, would be more of an incentive for me to dedicate as much time as possible to creating videos. But it also requires support from enough people to make that happen. If that's something you'd like to see, let me know in the comments. Take care, see you in the next one.